Hi everyone, and welcome back to Sleepcrime. If you're listening tonight as you unwind or drift towards sleep, I'd love to know where you're joining from. Leave a comment below, and if you enjoy quiet true crime storytelling like this, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Tonight, we'll spend some time with several real cases that unfold in different places, yet all leave behind the same quiet reminder that the truth isn't always found as quickly as we'd hope. So get comfortable, let the day slowly fade away, and when you're ready, let's begin. Story 1. The boy was barely old enough to speak in full sentences. 3 years old. He was found alone on a quiet street, diaper dirty, shoes on the wrong feet. No adult nearby. No explanation. People in the neighborhood knew his parents. Careful. Attentive. The kind who watched closely. This wasn't something they would allow. Police followed the trail back to the house. It didn't take long before the situation shifted into something else entirely. Inside, his mother was dead. Not just dead. Hidden. Covered. As if someone had tried to make the room look calm from a distance. The first conclusion came quickly. Too quickly. A note was found. Written by her husband. The words became a shortcut. A motive folded neatly into place. Within hours, suspicion hardened into certainty. And then the story froze there for decades. Because the man they accused did not kill his wife. And somewhere along the way, the people who were supposed to check that certainty stopped checking. The truth stayed quiet for 25 years, waiting, and it would eventually come from the only person who had actually seen what happened. The child. North Austin, Texas. August 13th, 1986. Early that morning, a man noticed a small boy wandering near a residence on Hazelhurst Drive. The child didn't seem lost in the usual way. No crying, just confusion. The neighbor took his hand and walked him back to the house, calling for his mother as they stepped inside. No response. Room by room, the house stayed still. Until the bedroom. That's where the neighbor stopped. I remember thinking how quiet everything sounded for a house that should have been awake by then. Sheriff Jim Boutwell arrived shortly after. In the bedroom, beneath a blanket weighed down by a suitcase and a wicker basket, Christine Morton's body was found. When those items were moved, what remained was difficult to recognize. She had been struck repeatedly with something heavy. The house offered no signs of a break-in. Nothing missing. No sign of sexual assault. That absence confused investigators until they noticed the note on the dresser. It was written by Christine's husband, Michael. Later that same day, Michael left work to pick up his son from daycare. Eric wasn't there. He hadn't been dropped off. Michael called home. A man answered. It was the sheriff. He didn't explain. He only told Michael to come home immediately. When Michael arrived, he was told his wife was dead. Murdered. He asked to see her. Not to challenge it. Just to understand it. The answer was no. From that moment on, every conversation shifted. Questions weren't curious anymore. They leaned forward. They assumed. Michael could feel the decision had already been made. Sometimes you can tell when someone's already stopped listening. Weeks passed. The funeral ended. Life tried to reassemble itself around what was left. Then on September 25th, there was a knock at the door. Michael was holding Eric when he opened it. Sheriff Boutwell stood there with deputies. No warning. No delay. Michael was under arrest. He barely had time to react. He asked to call someone to take care of his son. He was told that wouldn't be necessary. A deputy reached in and pulled Eric from his arms. The child screamed, arms stretched out, calling for his father as he was carried away. February 9th, 1987. The trial began less than 6 months after Christine's death. Michael believed something basic would protect him, that telling the truth would be enough. He didn't think conviction was even possible. The prosecutor was Ken Anderson, the district attorney. Sharp, confident, known for pressing hard. This case mattered to him. Winning it would move his career forward. Anderson focused on the note. An argument the night before. A disagreement about intimacy. The prosecution shaped it into a story of anger and rejection. A birthday. A refusal. Violence that followed. Details were stretched. Context narrowed. The absence of other evidence barely slowed the momentum. Once a story settles in, it's hard to get people to look anywhere else. What no one in that courtroom knew was that a 3-year-old boy had been awake that night, and he remembered. The version the prosecutor offers the jury is simple, almost tidy. Michael was dissatisfied. The marriage was failing. He wanted out. On his birthday, his wife turned him away, and according to the state, that refusal tipped him into violence. That is the frame. Everything else is made to fit inside it. Michael takes the stand in his own defense. When the photographs are shown, he can't hold himself together. He cries openly as images of Christine's body are placed in front of him. The courtroom watches. Some of them decide then. When it's his turn to speak, he tells them what his morning looked like. Christine was alive when he left for work. He arrived and clocked in around 6 o'clock that morning. Whatever happened in that house, he says, happened after he was already gone. He explains the note. Says it wasn't anger. Says it was routine, even playful. The kind of message married people leave without thinking much about it. But by then, the room has already shifted away from him. Once a jury starts leaning, you can feel it, even before anyone says a word. The prosecution saves one witness for the end. The medical examiner. Dr. Roberto Bayardo takes the stand and talks about stomach contents, about digestion, about timing. Under oath, he estimates Christine's time of death around 1 o'clock in the morning, hours before Michael says he left for work, hours before he claims he last saw her alive. That gap matters. To the jury, it sounds like science closing a door. The defense feels it immediately. With that testimony, Michael's timeline collapses. His explanation no longer fits. What no one in that room hears is what isn't said, that the examiner could not actually determine the time of death with that kind of certainty, that the estimate was not reliable, that the science didn't support the confidence being projected. But the words are already out there now. The trial ends on February 17th. In closing arguments, the prosecutor goes further. He introduces something new. A claim of sexual assault after the killing. No evidence. No forensic support. Just a statement placed into the jury's mind at the last possible moment. No one interrupts him. As he speaks, his voice breaks. Tears appear. The display lands. The jury doesn't take long to decide. Later that afternoon, the verdict comes back. Guilty. Life in prison. Afterward, the prosecutor tells reporters that life is too lenient. That death would have been more appropriate. It was strange watching someone cry so hard and still sound satisfied. When the sentence is read, Michael feels it physically. The air leaves his chest. His legs give out. If the chair hadn't been behind him, he would have fallen. He is led away in handcuffs, still saying the same thing. That he didn't do it. That there has been a mistake. No one listens. An innocent man is sent to prison for the rest of his life. Somewhere outside those walls, the person who actually killed Christine remains free. Inside, time stretches. Michael files appeal after appeal. Each one is denied. Years pass. The only thing that breaks the routine are visits from his son. Twice a year. Court ordered. Carefully managed. Eric is brought by Michael's sister-in-law. Those visits are everything. And they're also painful. Michael notices the distance growing. The boy changing. Becoming someone else. The first time Eric calls his Aunt Mom, it stops him cold. Later, as Eric becomes a teenager, the visits feel awkward. Stiff. Like obligations neither of them knows how to navigate anymore. You could tell he was trying to be polite, not comfortable. One day a letter arrives. Eric asks to stop visiting, to suspend the meetings. Because the visits are mandated by the court, Eric needs permission. His father's permission. Michael writes back. He agrees, but asks for one last visit. Just one. To hear it face to face. When they meet, they exchange greetings. Michael asks if this is goodbye. Eric doesn't look up. He stares at the floor and says yes. Michael turns to his sister-in-law. Take care of my son. And just like that, the door closes again. And then Michael walks out of the courtroom alone. By that point, the story has already taken root. Ken Anderson convinces Christine's family that Michael is responsible. There's no room left for doubt in their minds. Eric is raised by Christine's sister, and from early on, he's told a single version of events. His father killed his mother. Michael understands what that means. If he can't undo the conviction, he won't just lose his freedom. He'll lose his son for good. Years pass. Appeals go nowhere. Paperwork comes back stamped and closed. By 2004, Michael has been locked away for 17 years when a new possibility finally appears. The Innocence Project, a non-profit that looks at old cases through DNA. It's not hope exactly, but it's something different. Around that time, a phone call goes out from New York. I remember thinking they must have dialed the wrong number. John Rayleigh answers. He's a civil attorney. No background in criminal defense. No murder cases. He's known to the project because of a medical malpractice lawsuit. That's it. But they want him. It takes him a moment to even understand what's being asked. Then he says yes. When the trial records arrive, he starts reading. Slowly at first. Then faster. And then he stops. The note stands out immediately. The one Michael left for Christine. Rayleigh can't reconcile it. If someone plans to kill their spouse, drawing attention to a minor argument doesn't make sense. It does the opposite. He keeps reading. There's no eyewitness. No history of violence. No criminal record. Michael had passed 2 lie detector tests before trial. That had barely been mentioned. Then Rayleigh reaches the medical examiner's testimony. Dr. Bayardo didn't examine Christine's body until days after her death. That alone makes precise timing impossible. Yet the time of death was presented as firm. Certain. Even worse, the estimate relied almost entirely on stomach contents. A method widely criticized in medical literature. Not dependable. Not definitive. Not something that should have carried the weight it did. If that testimony falls apart, so does the verdict. Rayleigh isn't declaring Michael innocent yet. Not to himself. But he knows this much, the conviction doesn't hold up. At that point, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just needed to know what was real. He decides to meet Michael. At the Mark W. Michael unit in East Texas, Rayleigh is brought into the family visitation room. Michael is already there, waiting. Rayleigh asks him to walk through 2 days. August 12th and 13th, 1986. Nothing skipped. Nothing rushed. Michael starts with his birthday. He had just turned 32. Things were finally getting better after years of stress with a sick child. They went out to dinner. City Grill. A simple night. He remembers walking out together. Eric between them. A hand in each of theirs. That feeling parents get when everything lines up for a moment. Back home, Eric is put to bed. Christine falls asleep. Michael leaves a short note. Nothing dramatic. No anger. Just a note. The alarm goes off early. He showers. Shaves. Gets dressed. That's the last time he sees Christine alive. As Michael talks, his voice shifts when he speaks about her. Her laugh. How she threw her head back. How it pulled other people in without trying. She was smart. Not just friendly. Grounded. People liked her easily. Rayleigh watches closely. This is what he does for a living. He listens. He looks for cracks. There aren't any. I wasn't hearing a performance. I was hearing someone remember. Then Michael talks about the arrest. About holding Eric. About watching deputies pull his son away as he screamed for his father. Rayleigh feels it land hard. Not as a lawyer. As a parent. He leaves the prison shaken. Goes home. Tells his wife Kelly what he's seen. She listens. Looks at him. And tells him plainly, then do it. Rayleigh doesn't hesitate. He assembles a team. When they review the list of physical evidence, something new appears. Or rather, something old that never made it to court. A blue bandana. Stained with blood. It had been found near a construction site, roughly 100 yards from the Morton home. Spotted by a deputy during the original investigation. Logged. Then forgotten. Back in 1986, there was no DNA testing available to analyze it. But now there is. And for the first time in decades, the story begins to move again. The bandana was sealed, labeled, and shelved. That was it. No follow-up. No testing. It sat there quietly while years stacked on top of it. For Rayleigh, that piece of cloth mattered. If it carried Christine's DNA, and someone else's alongside it, the story would finally crack open. That was the hope. Getting to it turned out to be harder than expected. When his team went to the sheriff's department and asked to examine the evidence, they were turned away. No explanation that made sense. Just a refusal. That raised a different kind of question. If the bandana was meaningless, why protect it? Rayleigh filed a motion asking the court to compel the state to release the evidence for DNA testing. He waited. Months passed. Then more. By 2005, there was still no response. Silence. So he picked up the phone. The district attorney at the time was John Bradley. Rayleigh called him directly and introduced himself. He explained what they were asking for and why. Not to embarrass anyone. Not to rewrite history. Just to know what actually happened. Either Michael belonged in prison, or a violent killer was still free. Bradley's response was brief. Testing the evidence, he said, would muddy the waters. Rayleigh didn't understand what that meant. He still doesn't. That phrase stuck with me. I kept turning it over, trying to make it mean something reasonable. What Rayleigh didn't need explained was the relationship behind the refusal. Bradley had been mentored by Ken Anderson, the same prosecutor who secured Michael's conviction. Anderson was now a district judge, deeply connected, well-positioned. If DNA testing unraveled the case, it wouldn't just be inconvenient. It would expose what had been hidden. And there was something else. Material in the prosecutor's files that Anderson never wanted reviewed. Bradley understood that. The motion was denied. Rayleigh hadn't been prepared for the resistance. Not like this. Not the scale of it. The quiet coordination. The weight of the office pushing back. Michael's life was still suspended in that balance. But by then, the damage had spread further. Years earlier, the state had taken his freedom. Now it took his son. When Eric turned 18, Michael received a letter. Eric planned to legally change his last name. He was going to be adopted by his aunt and her husband. It would sever the last formal tie. Michael had endured a lot by then. The murder, the arrest, the sentence, the appeals that went nowhere, family deaths, closed doors, bureaucratic errors. That letter broke him. That was the moment he stopped sounding steady. March 7th, 2008. More than 3 years after filing the motion, Rayleigh finally stood before a judge. He explained the bandana, the blood, the fact that it had never been tested. He told the court how the state had blocked access from the beginning. He hoped for an order, just an order. He didn't know the decision had already been made. The request was denied. Bradley wasn't even present at the hearing. Rayleigh left furious. He didn't cool off. He didn't wait. He got into his car and drove to Georgetown to confront Bradley in person. Nearly 200 miles. Those who knew him worried. He was shaking. His anger sat right at the surface. I honestly thought something might happen to him on that drive. He was that upset. When Rayleigh arrived at Bradley's office, exhaustion and frustration collided. He raised his voice, loud enough for others to hear. "What are you afraid of?" He asked Bradley what he would do if DNA testing cleared Michael, and pointed to someone else. He said he could handle the truth. Then he walked out. Later, Rayleigh would admit something he hadn't shared before. There were moments when continuing felt impossible. Financial pressure, a family to support, a case that consumed time and returned nothing. The temptation to step away was real. Then on a Saturday morning, the phone rang. It was Michael. He sounded different. He told Rayleigh he was eligible for parole again. That should have been good news. But there was a condition. To be considered, Michael would have to admit guilt, confess to murdering his wife. That's when I realized how much they were willing to trade, just to keep things quiet. By now, Michael has been locked away for 21 years. He doesn't know where his son lives. He doesn't know what name he uses. He doesn't know if Eric would even recognize him. Rayleigh wouldn't have been shocked if Michael chose the deal. Confession in exchange for a chance at parole. After that much time, after that much loss, it would have been understandable. But the cost was too high. Admitting guilt wouldn't just rewrite the case. It would erase Michael's last connection to his son forever. Rayleigh asked him plainly what he planned to do. Michael didn't hesitate. All he had left, he said, was the truth, his actual innocence. And if holding on to that meant dying in prison, then so be it. That answer came out fast, like he'd already decided years ago. Rayleigh felt it hit him all at once. The weight of it, the clarity. He promised Michael then that he would not stop. Not while he could still breathe. The fight continued. By 2010, 6 years into the effort, the case finally reached the Third Court of Appeals. Rayleigh stood before the judges and focused on the one piece of evidence that had always mattered most. The bloodstained bandana. There was no lawful reason to block testing, he argued. None. When the court asked the question everyone asked, what if the DNA came back against Michael? Rayleigh answered simply. There was only one way to find out. While the judges deliberated, John Bradley went public. He spoke to the media, framing the request as desperate, unrealistic, a distraction. He said that if Michael would promise to accept responsibility should the bandana rule out another suspect, then maybe testing could be considered. Rayleigh pushed back in court. They weren't asking the state to pay. They weren't asking for favors. Just the truth. And the resistance itself, he said, told a story. At that point, it felt like they were arguing harder against answers than against crime. Months later, the ruling came down. DNA testing would be allowed. It had taken 6 years. The testing itself would take months more. While they waited, Rayleigh's office filed a public records request. They wanted access to Ken Anderson's original prosecution files. If the state had fought this hard, there had to be something inside those folders. What they found was worse than expected. Evidence pointing away from Michael had been sitting in the district attorney's files all along. From the beginning, the original investigation showed Michael never should have been the prime suspect. There was a footprint in the mud behind the house that was never preserved. Strange fingerprints on the sliding glass door that were never analyzed. Reports of an unfamiliar man driving a large van in the area days before the murder, near where the bandana was found. A man seen walking into the wooded area behind the Morton home. None of it had reached the defense. And then there was Eric. On the day of Christine's funeral, 3-year-old Eric spoke with his grandmother, Rita. She wrote down his words exactly as he said them. His mother was crying. Someone told her to stop. The monster was there. He hit her. He threw a blue suitcase onto the bed. He was angry. Mommy went to the hospital. When asked where the monster left, Eric said the front door. Then Rita asked the question that mattered most. Was Daddy there? Eric said no. Only Mommy and Eric were there. That wasn't memory drifting. That was a child describing what he saw. That statement was buried for 25 years. Hidden from the defense. Hidden from the court. Hidden from the jury. Ken Anderson had known. And still, he sent Michael to prison for life. The man Eric called the monster was never pursued. Instead, detectives later told Christine's mother that Eric must have meant his father. That he was confused. That he didn't recognize him. But Eric never described his father. He described someone else. And the truth, once finally uncovered, made one thing unmistakably clear. This was never a mistake. Eric had been so young when it happened that the memory didn't stay with him. Whatever images existed at 3 years old faded with time, buried under years of being told a different story. June of 2011. Michael has been incarcerated for 25 years. The evidence has been gone for months. The waiting stretches. There's no guarantee the bandana will answer anything. It could come back empty. It could lead nowhere. Michael prepares himself for that. Then one day, he's called to the family room. John Rayleigh is there. And he's smiling. The results are finally in. The blood on the bandana belongs to Christine. And there's another profile mixed in. Not Michael's. Someone else. That smile, it wasn't subtle. You could tell before he said a word. The team runs the unknown DNA through the national database. Millions of profiles. The system doesn't hesitate. It hits. The name that comes back is Mark Allen Norwood, a man with a long criminal history across 3 states. Break-ins, violence, assault with intent to kill. Norwood had stayed invisible for decades. Rayleigh is immediately convinced of one thing. Christine was not his only victim. They start digging through unsolved cases in nearby counties. That's when they find Deborah Jan Baker, killed a few years after Christine. The similarities are impossible to ignore. Both women were beaten with a heavy blunt object. Both were covered with household items. Neither showed signs of sexual assault. And both lived within 10 miles of each other. No one had ever connected the cases. Rayleigh checks Norwood's address at the time, 1 street corner away from Deborah Baker's home. To be sure, the team gains access to the Baker evidence. Hairs recovered from the scene are tested. The DNA comes back clean. Definitive. Mark Allen Norwood killed Deborah Baker. That was the moment everything locked into place. Investigators move in. Norwood is confronted. Decades have passed, but the path leads directly back to him. He's arrested, charged, identified as a suspect in multiple murders. A violent offender, finally named. When news breaks that Michael Morton was wrongfully convicted, Ken Anderson steps forward publicly. He apologizes, not for his actions, but for what he calls a system failure. He insists there was no misconduct. In the crowd stands Deborah Baker's daughter. She listens, and she doesn't accept it. She says Anderson bears responsibility, not only for Michael's lost years, but for her mother's death. Because Norwood should have been caught long before. That apology didn't land the way he thought it would. The truth keeps moving forward now. Evidence surfaces showing Anderson deliberately withheld material that could have cleared Michael. A special criminal inquiry is launched. The fight that Michael's legal team began years earlier finally reaches its final stage. Ken Anderson is disbarred, removed from the bench, and convicted for misconduct resulting in a wrongful conviction. He becomes the first prosecutor in the country to go to jail for it. As for Norwood, He is convicted of murdering both Christine Morton and Deborah Baker. He receives 2 life sentences. Investigators believe there may have been others. Whatever his pattern was, it ends there. It felt messy, loud, like everything was happening at once. Outside, cameras crowd in. People move without direction. But above it all, the day is bright, clear, sunlight everywhere. After 25 years, Michael Morton walks free. And the story finally stops running. The sunlight hit him all at once. Michael tilts his head back without thinking, like someone standing still under an open sky for the first time in years, just letting it soak in. No rush, no words, just warmth on his face. Later, John Rayleigh invites him over for dinner. Nothing formal, just a table, a house, and one other guest. Eric is there. Michael notices it before anything is said. The shoes, almost the same. New blue jeans on both of them. The way they carry themselves. The way they walk. Even the angle of their heads as they move through the room. It's unsettling and familiar. They don't hesitate. A handshake happens out of habit, but it doesn't last. It turns into a hug without discussion, without planning. Like muscle memory waking up after decades. It was strange how fast it felt normal, like time hadn't really won. Michael says one word. Son. Eric answers. Dad. For a brief moment, it all lines up. And Michael feels something he doesn't try to explain. Just a glimpse. Something whole. There aren't many people who can point to someone else and say, without exaggeration, that this person gave them their life back. Michael can. John Rayleigh didn't know him. Didn't know him anything. And still he stayed. He fought. He absorbed the cost of it. That kind of thing changes you. You don't walk away from that the same person you were before. Michael calls him more than a lawyer now. More than a savior. A friend. A brother. And everything feels different. The questions that used to spin endlessly don't press as hard anymore. The unfairness. The contradictions. The weight of what shouldn't have happened. He doesn't feel the need to solve them. He understands suffering now. Not in theory. In his bones. And somehow, that understanding feels like a gift. He wouldn't choose what happened. But he knows this much. He wouldn't be who he is now without being broken first. Life finally feels good. Story 2. She's yelling. It's frantic. Someone goes down hard. There's a voice trying to slow things down, asking for cooperation, asking who else might be inside the house. The answers don't land. They drift. I don't know. I don't know. The man speaking is Michael Herman. This is only minutes after he says he heard his roommate fall from an upstairs window. The house is still unsettled, doors open where they shouldn't be, and no one knows yet if the danger has passed, or if it's still standing in the next room. The key is inside, downstairs. The back door isn't locked. Michael walks them around the house. From the outside, it looks quiet, almost ordinary, but the officers don't assume anything. They can't. Not yet. He's told to step closer, to sit, to breathe. On the ground nearby, Amy Harwick lies barely conscious. Blood covers parts of her body. Her breathing is shallow. Again, the question comes back. Is anyone else here? The answer doesn't change. I don't know. Police announce themselves, calling out through the house. Hands up. Come out now. Nothing happens. No footsteps. No voices. No movement. Michael is searched. His hands are stained red. At that point, no one knows what story belongs to who. Everything feels unfinished. With no one else appearing, the focus tightens. The questions sharpen. What happened tonight? Michael says he was asleep. All night, he insists. When asked about drugs, he shrugs. He smokes marijuana. That's it. But his body tells a different story. He's restless. His words come unevenly. His explanation never quite settles. And still nothing directly ties him to what's happened. Amy is still alive, but barely. Paramedics move fast, doing what they can where they are, then preparing to move her. Her pulse is dangerously low. There isn't time. She's taken to the hospital in critical condition. Earlier that day, she had been with close friends, celebrating Valentine's Day. Now she's unconscious, and the only person who can explain what happened cannot speak. While emergency responders focus on keeping Amy alive, detectives turn back to the house. They start slow, careful, room by room. At the front of the home, the French doors stand shattered. Broken glass litters the floor. Among it, small drops of blood. Not pooled, not smeared. Just there. Beyond that, nothing. The first floor looks untouched. Furniture in place. No drawers pulled open. No signs of a struggle. This raises a question that doesn't have an answer yet. If someone broke in, why leave everything behind? The house contains expensive items. Electronics, art, personal belongings. All where they should be. Amy's wallet is found. 2 handbags. Cash around $400 to $500. Still there. It doesn't feel like someone was searching for things. It feels like they already knew where to go. Upstairs, the atmosphere changes. Amy's bedroom is chaotic. The bed looks disturbed, like someone got up suddenly. Clothing and personal items are scattered. Nothing here feels accidental. Black beads are everywhere. On the floor. Across furniture. And then leading outward. The trail continues through the open balcony doors. Down below, there's blood. Above, there's disorder. When those pieces connect, the picture becomes harder to avoid. Whatever happened here wasn't a fall. It was a force. The motive still isn't clear. But the randomness is gone now. This wasn't chance. And with Amy unable to speak, investigators turn back to the one person left inside the story. The roommate they can no longer ignore. Michael Herman doesn't calm down. Not really. He stays tense, jumpy. His movements never fully settle. And because of that, at least in those first hours, he remains the only person investigators can focus on. Not because they have proof, but because there's no one else yet. He tells them he met Amy through a shared friend. Less than a year ago. That's it. No long history. No complicated past. A few months before the attack, Amy rented him the downstairs room. Extra income. Simple arrangement. Practical. Still, detectives can't just take that at face value. They photograph him. Standard procedure. And that's when they notice it. Scratches. Scrapes. Marks across his body that don't come from nowhere. When you see injuries like that, you pause. You don't label them yet, but you don't ignore them either. Michael is asked to rewind the day. Slowly. He says Valentine's Day was quiet. He was alone. Went to bed early, around 8 in the evening. Not long after, glass broke upstairs. He thought Amy dropped something. Didn't check. Just rolled over and went back to sleep. Hours pass. Then sometime after 1 in the morning, everything changes. He says he woke up to screaming. Not a crash. Not a bang. Screaming. And then a sound he can't really explain any other way, like someone being thrown from a window. He says he ran outside. Panic. Confusion. In the dark, he scraped his hands climbing over a wrought iron fence. He didn't have his phone, so he went door to door until a neighbor let him call for help. Throughout the interview, he doesn't resist. He doesn't hedge. He answers questions directly. Almost too directly. At the end of it, detectives don't feel like he's lying. Not outright. But belief isn't clearance. And until more facts surface, Michael can't be ruled out. Because from the outside, the evidence still circles back to him. If Michael is innocent, then whoever did this didn't disappear. They walked away. So investigators widen the lens. They start looking outward. Neighbors. Streets. Anything that might have been seen or captured. And that's when they find it. A neighbor nearby has security cameras. 2 of them matter. The first clip is from a doorbell camera. Just after 1 in the morning, the night Amy was attacked. It shows Michael running. House to house. Knocking. Desperate. Looking for someone, anyone, to help. The time matches his emergency call. For the first time, there's something concrete backing his story. But it's not enough on its own. Then there's the second clip. Earlier that same evening, before everything unraveled. Just before 9 at night, a man appears on camera. White male. Baseball cap. Gloves. His face is visible, but the image is soft, indistinct. You can't make out features. But one thing is immediately clear. It isn't Michael. As the man moves closer to Amy's property, something stands out. He's wearing large work-style gloves. And then he looks directly at the camera and reaches up. He tries to block it. That's the moment you realize he knows he's being seen. The timing matters. Investigators believe this is when the window is smashed and the French doors are opened. The noise Michael later described, it lines up. But the footage doesn't give them a name. Or a face they can work with. Just a shape. A blur. In a city the size of Los Angeles, that's almost nothing. Still, it's more than they had before. This unknown man becomes the priority. Not a theory anymore. A real presence. With that shift, detectives return to Amy's house. Same rooms, same disorder. But now they're looking differently. Slower, as if Amy might have left something behind without realizing it. And in the middle of the chaos, they find it. Her phone. The phone is resting near the edge of the mattress. Not cracked, not smashed. It looks untouched. And with Amy still in the hospital, unable to explain anything herself, this small object suddenly carries a lot of weight. If answers exist, they're probably here. Before investigators go any further, there's a brief pause in the story. Investigators begin going through Amy's phone carefully. The contact list is long. Family members, professional colleagues, friends, friends of friends. Amy isn't just a private person, she's visible. A licensed family therapist with a doctorate, a local public figure, someone who appears on radio, television, talk shows. She knows a lot of people. That makes the phone overwhelming. Hundreds of conversations, dozens of possible connections, too many starting points. But one detail stands out. Amy had chosen to share her live location with a single person. One name, Robert Koshland. At first, it's just a name on a screen. Detectives don't know who he is yet. That changes quickly. Robert is Amy's best friend. He's asked to come to the station. The call is brief, direct. When he arrives, the reality hits all at once. He's told she was attacked in her own home. The questions start immediately. Who did she know? Who had access? Who might have wanted to hurt her? He's shaken, but he stays. He answers everything. You can hear it in his voice. He's still trying to catch up to what's happened. Robert starts from the beginning. Amy's childhood. Lansdale, Pennsylvania. Supportive parents. A stable home. She graduates high school in the late 1990s, then heads west a couple of years later, determined to build a life around helping people. Los Angeles doesn't change that. While many around her chase visibility, Amy is focused on study, on becoming a family therapist. That path matters to her. Robert meets her in 2012. A pool party. Casual. Unplanned. They talk. They click. Same humor. Same odd rhythm. What begins as an easy conversation turns into something durable. Over time, they become inseparable. Daily calls. Constant check-ins. Support without conditions. She's outgoing. Approachable. Someone who can talk to anyone. And at the same time, strange in the best way. Unfiltered. A little weird. She sounds like someone who didn't need to try to be interesting. Detectives realize quickly, if anyone understands Amy's world, it's Robert. Then they show him something else from the phone. A photo. It was sent just after 2 in the morning. In the image, Amy is sitting on a green couch beside a friend. She's smiling. Relaxed. She's wearing the same clothes she would later be found in outside. And around her neck, the same black necklace. The one whose beads were scattered through her bedroom. The photo was taken only a couple of hours before the attack. And suddenly the timeline tightens. Robert helps them slow the night down, piece by piece. February 14th. Valentine's Day. Amy had gone out with friends, a planned girls' night. A show in Los Angeles. The group chat backs it up. Messages are light. Casual. Nothing tense. Nothing unusual. They watch the performance. Laugh. Talk. And sometime around midnight, everyone disperses. Amy heads home on her own. No one reports an argument. No concern raised afterward. At least not then. The questions keep coming. Detectives want everything. Habits. Patterns. Anything that might explain what happened later that night. Then the room changes. Another officer steps in. The questioning stops without a word. His voice is low. Measured. The kind of voice people use when they already know the impact of what they're about to say. Amy didn't survive. She dies early on February 15th at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, after doctors do everything they can. The injuries are too severe. Robert hears it sitting in that room. There's a moment where you're still listening, even though nothing else is being said. The shock settles in unevenly. This wasn't just a friend. This was family. Someone constant. Someone woven into his daily life. Later, he spends the day calling people. One phone call after another. Telling friends what they don't yet know. Repeating the same sentence until it barely sounds real anymore. He says there aren't words that fit. Just disbelief. A quiet question looping in his head. Are you sure? Amy is gone. And with that, a sudden, hollow loneliness. She had been generous. Curious. Actively living the life she'd worked toward. Helping people through her therapy. Traveling. teaching, building something meaningful. For her family, the loss is unbearable. Not just because she's gone, but because she was still in motion, still burning bright, still becoming. As grief spreads outward, the story doesn't stay private for long. News breaks. Her photo appears across local broadcasts. The city reacts. A well-known therapist has been killed in her Hollywood Hills home. Police confirm it publicly. This wasn't an accident. Tips begin to come in. Friends want answers. Strangers want justice. The pressure builds quickly. But for detectives, one interview already matters more than the others. Robert tells them this didn't begin that night. He takes them back years. 2014. Amy calls him after returning from a work trip. She's shaken. Something feels wrong in her home. She can't immediately explain it, just that things aren't where they should be. Photo albums are missing. Some pictures are flipped over. Her computer won't work. Robert drives over right away. And once he sees the apartment, the feeling sharpens. This wasn't a typical break-in. The television is still there. Artwork untouched. Jewelry left behind. Nothing of obvious value taken. Only personal items. Sentimental ones. It feels deliberate, like a warning. Then there's the laptop. He opens it. It doesn't boot. Not slowly. Not incorrectly. It's empty. Completely wiped. No system left behind. Amy contacts police. But there's nothing to collect. No fingerprints. No clear entry point. Whoever did this was careful. And it doesn't stop there. Over the following years, things escalate. Anonymous messages online. Emails sent to her workplace meant to discredit her. A man seen lingering near her house at night. Robert tries to help however he can. Cameras. Safety tools. Checking in constantly. Amy shares her live location with him, just in case. She didn't feel safe, but she also didn't want to stop living. They never gather enough proof to make it official. But privately they're certain. There's one man behind it. One fixation that never fades. When detectives finally ask Robert the question directly, who might have done this, he doesn't hesitate. Amy had already answered it for him. She told him plainly that if anything ever happened to her, it would be Gareth. She said it more than once. And that takes the story back even further, to the year 2010, a decade before Amy is killed. She's in her late 20s, still working toward her degree, still building her future. And one night, at a party in Hollywood, she meets a man who will refuse to ever let her go. At the party, Amy notices him first because he won't stop looking at her. Not in a subtle way. Just fixed. Eventually he comes over, starts talking, introduces himself as Gareth Pursehouse. He seems ordinary enough. He talks about his day job in information technology. Mentions photography. Comedy. Stand-up, maybe someday. There's an ease to him at first. Amy responds to that. They trade numbers before the night ends. People who were there remember him as loud, energetic, smiling constantly. And it's obvious he's taken with her. They start dating. Months go by. Then it becomes official. From the outside, it looks promising. Two driven people trying to make something work in Los Angeles. Both creative. Both ambitious. But slowly the tone shifts. Friends notice Amy pulling back. She's still kind, still warm, but less present. She stops showing up as often. Misses plans. Drifts. The center of her life seems to narrow. You don't notice it all at once. It's only clear later, when you think back. By the time a year has passed, the relationship has changed completely. One night in 2011, an argument explodes. It doesn't stay verbal. Gareth becomes violent. Amy calls for help. She leaves the house. And when it's over, she doesn't go back. She ends the relationship that night. What follows isn't quiet. Amy starts documenting everything. Photos of injuries. Screenshots of messages. Angry voicemails. Texts that don't stop. She blocks him wherever she can. Keeps records. Dates. Times. When she goes to police, the history matters. There are reports already. Prior incidents. A pattern. The court grants a restraining order, lasting 5 years. On paper, that should be the end of it. Amy tries to move forward. But the feeling never leaves. Even with the order in place, she watches her surroundings more closely. Listens longer to sounds at night. The sense that she's being watched doesn't fade. Years pass. Disturbing things happen. Break-ins that don't make sense. Messages from nowhere. A presence that feels familiar without being visible. Amy and Robert are convinced it's Gareth. But belief isn't evidence. And without proof, nothing sticks. Eventually, the restraining order expires. That's when Amy grows more afraid. She tells Robert plainly, if anything happens to her, it's Gareth. Now, sitting with detectives, Robert gives them the name. And this time it fits. Police place a photo of Gareth beside a still image pulled from the neighbor's camera. Height, build, age. The similarities line up. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Investigators review the footage again, now with intention. The night comes into focus. Valentine's Day. Just before 9 in the evening. Gareth climbs into Amy's yard. He's wearing gloves. He moves carefully, deliberately. At the French doors, he breaks the glass. In the process, he cuts himself. Blood, later found, will confirm that moment. Inside, he doesn't touch the first floor. Nothing is taken. Nothing disturbed. He goes upstairs, to Amy's bedroom. And there, in the dark, he does something calculated. Something chilling. He slips into her bed, under the covers, and waits. Time stretches in that bedroom. Minutes blur. Then hours. Gareth waits, hidden beneath the covers, listening to a house that isn't his. 9 years have passed since the relationship ended, and still he waits. Just after 1 in the morning, Amy gets home. Before she even reaches the stairs, she sends a text to Robert. A simple message. Routine. Neither of them knows it will be the last time she ever reaches out. She goes upstairs the way she always does. No hesitation. No warning. And when she steps into her bedroom, the space shifts instantly. Gareth is there. He moves first. Fast. She reacts without thinking. Her phone leaves her hand, flying toward him as she turns to run. He grabs her. The necklaces around her neck snap away, beads scattering across the room. She fights back, bites his arm, tries to break free. Everything she has goes into those seconds. But he's much larger, taller, stronger. The imbalance is overwhelming. He forces her toward the balcony edge. This is the part that never gets easier to hear, even when you know what's coming. Afterward, Gareth leaves. He's captured again on a neighbor's camera, moving away from the house. Almost at the same moment, Michael runs for help, climbing fences, knocking on doors, calling for emergency services. By then, investigators already have the pieces lining up. Blood at the scene, messages on the phone, years of documented fear, a restraining order, the footage. It's enough. Later that afternoon, just after 4:30, officers head to Gareth's apartment in Playa del Rey. They find him as he's trying to leave. He doesn't get far. They stop him on the street and take him in for questioning. During processing, the injuries stand out immediately. Scratches across his body. Fresh. Unexplained. On his arm, a deep bruise. The shape is unmistakable. When you see marks like that, you don't need much imagination. Detectives collect a DNA sample. It will be compared to the blood found near the shattered glass at Amy's door. In the interview room, Gareth is asked when he last saw Amy. He shrugs, says it's been years. His tone is flat, almost bored. Then he's told she didn't survive. Something changes. His posture, his face. The ease disappears. Soon after, he refuses to answer anything at all. The interview ends there. He's booked into the county jail. Nearly 3 years pass before the case reaches trial. Amy can't speak for herself anymore. But the courtroom is never empty. Her family is there. Her friends. Every date. Every hearing. They showed up so she wouldn't be forgotten in that room. One by one, people testify. They talk about who Amy was. Her warmth. Her humor. The way she showed up for others. Robert takes the stand and walks the jury through the entire history. The relationship, the violence, the stalking, the break-ins, the years of fear. Prosecutors present the physical evidence. The DNA match. The blood at the scene tied directly to Gareth. And then, Amy speaks. Not in person, but through a letter she wrote just a month before she was killed. In it, she describes an encounter after the restraining order expired. Gareth finally appearing in public, yelling at her, causing a scene, then vanishing again. The letter is read aloud in court. It becomes impossible to ignore. On September 28, 2023, the jury returns its verdict. Guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder. The judge sentences Gareth Pursehouse to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After years of fear, loss, and waiting, there is finally an ending. Not the one Amy deserved, but one that holds. Living in fear would have meant handing control over to him. And that wasn't who she was. Amy believed that fear gives power away, and she refused to do that. She chose to live as herself, to decide her own direction, and she never let him take that from her. Her death doesn't stay confined to one house or one night. Across the country, people begin talking more openly about stalking, about domestic violence, about how long those shadows can follow someone, even after a relationship ends. Amy's life had always been about lifting others. Her words, her work, the way she showed up for people who were struggling, those things don't disappear with her. If anything, they become clearer. She spent her life helping people feel stronger, and that part of her didn't stop. Friends and family make a decision not to let her story fade into silence. They push forward with the causes she cared about most. Advocacy, awareness, a petition in her name aimed at strengthening laws meant to protect survivors of stalking and abuse. This becomes part of her legacy. She wanted to help people. It wasn't a role she stepped into later. It was who she was from the start. And now, that intention continues through the people she left behind. You still see her influence, even years later, in how people stand up for each other. Amy inspired others to live honestly, to be fully themselves, to take up space without apology. That kind of impact doesn't end. It carries forward quietly, persistently, in the lives she touched. Story 3. There were only 2 names pulled from a much longer list. Over several years, parents kept filing reports, children gone, one after another, stretching from 1993 through 2001. What eventually drew attention wasn't just the number. It was where some of them turned up. Far from the city, on roughly 400 acres of land in rural Georgia, stood a sealed-off compound. Entry wasn't casual. Outsiders didn't wander in by mistake. Inside the gates were things that felt out of place for the countryside, pyramid-shaped structures, a towering sphinx, monuments that didn't match the landscape around them. People there looked relaxed when visitors were allowed close enough to see. Smiles, waves, a sense that everything was orderly. But that surface calm hid something else. When local deputies tried to ask questions about the missing children, they never got far. Armed guards met them at the entrance, and the conversation ended there. What happened behind those gates stayed quiet for years, until doctors began to notice something they couldn't ignore. Hospitals across Georgia were admitting children from the same place. Some were barely into adolescence. Several were pregnant. The pattern was too clear to dismiss. Federal agents stepped in, but cautiously. The memory of a disastrous raid in Texas still hovered over every discussion. No one wanted another standoff that ended with children dead, so plans stalled. Information was thin. From the outside, the compound was a question mark. Then one child slipped through. A girl, only 7 years old, found a way out. She didn't bring documents or recordings. She brought her memory. And suddenly, the silence around that place started to crack. It's strange how often the first real answers come from the smallest voices. To understand how any of this began, you have to go back, not to Georgia, but to New York City. 1977. Queens. A small apartment, pressed up against streets that rarely slept. Nikki was 2 years old then, living alone with her mother. The neighborhood was rough in a way that didn't need explanation. Gangs were visible. Drugs were common. Violence wasn't an abstract idea. It was something you stepped around on the sidewalk, especially near Bushwick Avenue. Each morning, Nikki's mother left for work with the same knot in her stomach. She walked past the aftermath of fights, past sirens that never felt distant. And every day, the same thought followed her. This isn't where I want my child to grow up. Money was tight. Options were thinner than hope. Until one afternoon, when a man in a long white garment stopped her. He didn't argue or threaten. He handed her a book. On the cover was an address. That night, she read until there was nothing left to read. Page after page, something in it felt like an answer she'd been waiting for. By morning, she had already decided. She would go. She approached 717 Bushwick Avenue the next day with the same guarded instinct she used everywhere else. But as she got closer, the street felt different. Not quieter, just altered. Voices drifted out, singing, soft and steady, like a choir warming up. Inside, children moved freely. They laughed. They wore garments that made the room feel brighter than the block outside. What she saw wasn't chaos or fear. It was community. People talking about struggle without being swallowed by it. People lifting each other up instead of stepping over one another. After that, her life shifted almost without announcement. She came back. Then again. Gatherings became routine. The streets didn't magically change, but she felt less alone walking them. For the first time in years, the idea of a future didn't feel unrealistic. Time passed. Nikki grew. By the time she was 7, she noticed how deeply her mother believed. One day, she came along to a sermon. Her mother watched from a distance as Nikki blended in, unafraid, smiling. The sight was overwhelming. It looked like safety. It felt like peace. At the center of it all was one man. Dwight Malachi York was a preacher with an easy presence. He moved through rooms without friction. People felt seen when he spoke to them. Bringing others together wasn't a skill he practiced. It was simply how he operated. When you hear people describe him, it's always about how natural it felt to follow. The group called itself the Nuwabian Nation. Its beginnings traced back to New York in the 1960s, a period when the city offered little protection to black families. Discrimination was daily. Tension lived in the streets. Survival shaped communities as much as belief did. In that environment, promises of unity and safety carried weight. And for many, they sounded like answers. Street robberies, open drug deals, violence that felt routine instead of shocking. For a lot of people living in New York at the time, that was just the background noise of daily life. So when this new community appeared, it wasn't only about belief or identity. It offered something more basic, a place where black families felt protected, not just in one neighborhood, but across cities up and down the East Coast. There was also a deeper pull. For many people of African descent, history felt interrupted, culture fractured, lineage erased by slavery, and into that gap stepped Malachi York, speaking with certainty. He told them they weren't lost at all, that they were the original people, the first builders, the founders of civilization itself. Not just human beings, but divine in origin. He didn't frame it as theory. He spoke like someone delivering a long-awaited correction. York went further. He questioned why black people should have to fit into systems never built for them. Why not create something separate, planned, intentional, a community only for people of African descent? If you weren't black, he said plainly, you didn't belong in that space. That kind of clarity can feel powerful when everything else feels uncertain. York knew how to speak. That much was undeniable. He'd spent years refining his presence, building credibility, aligning himself with black liberation movements, including figures connected to the Black Panthers. His words carried the weight of activism, not just spirituality. Outside the pulpit, he had other identities. He recorded music, smooth jazz, funk, disco. He presented himself as creative, cultured, expansive. Artist, organizer, leader. Above all else, he was the center of the Nuwabian Nation. And by the time the 1980s arrived, his message of empowerment had only intensified. That was the moment Nikki's family made a decision that would change everything. In 1986, when Nikki was 11, she and her 2 younger siblings moved into the Bushwick compound full-time. They were promised safety, stability, food, shelter, a future that didn't involve the streets. The shift was immediate. One life disappeared. Another replaced it. The unpredictability of the city gave way to a space guarded by their own people. But protection came with structure, rules, expectations. Nothing stayed casual for long. Her clothes changed. Meals changed. Daily routines reshaped themselves around study and discipline. They read the Quran, learned Arabic from teachers brought in specifically for that purpose. Faith wasn't abstract anymore. It organized everything. York took a particular interest in Nikki and her siblings. He made sure they were fed, properly dressed, included. He greeted them by name, asked questions, paid attention. For a child, that kind of focus felt reassuring. It felt personal. Slowly, Nikki began to see him as more than a leader. He became a figure of authority and care. Someone strong. Someone watching over them. Not long after, her mother married him. That single change redefined Nikki's place in the world. York wasn't just the man at the center of the community anymore. He was family. In her mind, he became a father. When adults redefine roles like that, kids usually just accept it. By then, York wasn't just respected. He was revered. Seen as a protector, a savior, someone providing safety and purpose to more than 1,000 followers. The Bushwick Center grew crowded. Space tightened. Privacy vanished. Eventually, York said the city itself was the problem, that the streets were limiting them, that the next step required distance and land. He spoke of something larger than a community, a nation, its own documents, its own systems, a place where no outside authority dictated how they lived. And for that vision, New York wouldn't work. The answer, he said, was Georgia. More than 900 miles south, in Putnam County, sat open farmland. Rural, quiet, isolated, over 400 acres of it. When families arrived, many saw nothing but empty land stretching out in every direction. And to them, it felt like possibility. Isolation wasn't a drawback. It was part of the appeal. Fewer neighbors, fewer questions, fewer eyes. Once you're that far out, it starts to feel like the rest of the world doesn't exist. Before construction truly began, York reshaped the belief system again. He pulled from religions, myths, histories across the globe. Identities shifted. One moment he dressed like a Western figure, boots and hat included. The next, he claimed to be an extraterrestrial being. Then a tribal chief, feathers and all. The changes were constant. But eventually, he settled on a story that would define the new version of the Nubian nation. He gathered his followers and told them who they really were. Not just descendants of ancient Egyptians, but beings whose origins traced back beyond Earth itself. Another planet, another beginning. No one hesitated. They accepted it, and then they started building. The land doesn't stay empty for long. First comes a massive stone face, a sphinx head rising out of what used to be forgotten farmland. Then more follows. Artists are brought in. Walls are covered in murals. Structures appear one by one, until pyramids begin to dominate the landscape. Each addition feels deliberate, theatrical, impossible to ignore. What had been quiet Georgia countryside turns into something surreal. People driving past slow down. Neighbors talk. Some are curious, others uneasy. York and his followers give the place a name that feels intentional and symbolic. Tamari, Egypt of the West. Locals don't know what to make of it. They've seen it. They've talked about it. Most just shrug and say it's strange. But strange doesn't always mean dangerous. The grounds are clean. There's no loud music, no visible chaos, no obvious crime. From the outside, it looks controlled, almost peaceful, just unusual. What no one sees is what happens once the gates close. 2 years into life inside the community, Nikki finally feels steady. The routines are familiar now. The rules predictable. This is home, whether she questions it or not. Then, without warning, something shifts. One afternoon, one of York's wives notices Nikki alone and calls her over. Her tone is urgent, serious. She leads Nikki away from the open areas into a private room. The door closes. What she says next doesn't feel real at first. She explains that York will be the one to teach Nikki about sex, that this is part of growing up here, that she, the wife, will help guide her through it. As if this is knowledge being passed down. As if it's expected. Nikki doesn't interrupt. She doesn't ask questions. She just listens. Maybe this happens to everyone, she tells herself. Maybe this is normal here. York is the prophet, the teacher, the man everyone trusts. Sometimes kids don't question things because they don't know they're allowed to. She remembers lessons he'd already taught them. That the person who takes your virginity is someone you're forever connected to, loyal to. Then the door opens again. York enters the room. He closes and locks it behind him. He's 45 years old. Nikki looks at him, the man she's been told to see as her father, her protector. Something in her body reacts before her mind catches up. Fear. Sharp and immediate. Whatever trust she had fractures in that moment. He brushes off her hesitation. Tells her it's not serious. Asks why she's making it into something bigger than it is. She doesn't want this. She never does. He holds her down and does it anyway. Afterward, the world feels altered. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just wrong. She writes letters she never sends. Writes about hating her life. About wishing she'd never been born. About feeling trapped in a place that once felt safe. This is the man she was taught to revere. The master teacher. The center of everything. When belief like that is drilled into you from childhood, leaving doesn't feel possible. Even imagining it feels dangerous. So she stays quiet. Eyes are always watching. Loyalty is monitored. Disrespect is unthinkable. Speaking out would mean betraying not just him, but the entire structure around her. Her mother won't help. No one will. Silence can feel safer than telling the truth in places like that. Life goes on around her as if nothing has changed. People praise York. They thank him. They call him their savior. They don't see what she carries inside. But as Nikki gets older, patterns begin to surface. Certain girls change. Certain interactions repeat. Familiar looks. Familiar absences. It reminds her of herself. Of how miserable she felt when it started. York's power only expands. No one challenges him. No one looks too closely. The isolation protects him as much as it protects the community. Nikki begins to understand something quietly, almost unwillingly. She isn't the only one. Leaving still feels impossible. Everything she knows is here. Her family, her identity, her entire world. But seeing it happen to younger children breaks through the fear. What she endured is one thing. Watching it repeat is another. Despite years of manipulation, despite the grooming, despite the rules drilled into her, she knows the truth now. This is wrong. And slowly, the thought takes shape. Escaping isn't just about saving herself anymore. It's about the girls who don't yet know they need to be saved. The place is supposed to feel sacred, clean, protected, a refuge from everything ugly outside. But inside, the misery keeps piling up. Day by day, it gets heavier. Nikki feels it constantly, and the fear of leaving sits right beside it, because outside means no protection, no rules she understands, no map for how to survive. Still, part of her starts to lean toward that fear, toward the unknown. Her mother doesn't follow her there. For her, this community is the reason they're alive, the reason they escaped violence, hunger, chaos. So when Nikki finally gathers the nerve to say she wants out, the response isn't concern. It's rejection. The choice her mother makes is immediate, and it isn't her daughter. That's when the pressure starts. It doesn't look dramatic at first. Conversations shift. Tone hardens. York steps in. So does her mother. The message is consistent. Leaving is betrayal. Even so, Nikki doesn't collapse. With no safe place waiting for her, she starts searching quietly. Eventually, she finds someone who understands, a former member who has already left, now living in Atlanta. The offer is simple. A couch. A door that locks. Time to breathe. York doesn't see it that way. To him, this isn't just disobedience. It's humiliation. One of his daughters choosing to leave him, openly, threatens the image he's built so carefully. And that puts him in a corner. So he changes the story. Nikki isn't walking away. He's expelling her. The day she leaves, fear and numbness mix together until they're hard to separate. She doesn't know what comes next. Only that this choice, this one, is hers. When someone's never had control, even a terrifying choice can feel powerful. She tells herself that if something happens out there, at least it happened because she decided. For the first time, she isn't just obeying. Her focus sharpens. If she made it out, others can too. What she doesn't know yet is that federal investigators have already been circling York for years. Quietly, carefully. It started with phone calls that didn't match anything they'd heard before. Parents calling from different states, saying the same thing in different voices. Their child had joined a group. They couldn't make contact anymore. They didn't know where they were. They just knew something was wrong. Agents tried to follow up, tried to visit. They never got past the gate. Armed guards stood watch. Access denied. No explanations. At the time, even investigators didn't fully grasp what they were dealing with. Then doctors started raising concerns. Young girls arriving at hospitals, pregnant, some barely into adolescence. When records were compared, the trail kept leading back to the same place, the compound. The case deepened, but so did the fear of how it might end. There were reports of weapons stockpiled on the property. Concerns about a violent response if authorities moved too fast. A direct confrontation risked lives, especially children. Locals noticed the shift too. Armed patrols, marching guards. A posture that felt less defensive and more confrontational. Once guns are part of the message, everything changes. Law enforcement faced a question with no clean answer. How do you approach a closed community that claims it isn't bound by the law? How do you reach victims who are trained not to speak? And hanging over every decision was a recent memory no one could ignore. Just a year earlier in Texas, a prolonged standoff between federal agents and a religious group had ended in fire. 76 people died, children among them. What began as a warrant turned into a national trauma. The fallout was immediate. Public outrage, accusations, a lasting scar on law enforcement. Now, staring at York in his compound, authorities felt the same dread building again. Something dark was happening behind those walls. That much was clear. The question was how to stop it, without repeating history. For years, investigators kept circling the same problem. They had documents, patterns, rumors that lined up too neatly to ignore. But what they didn't have was a voice from inside. Someone who could say what life there was actually like. Someone willing to put their name on it. That changed when Nikki stepped forward. She wasn't polished. She didn't speak like a witness trained for court. She spoke like someone who had carried this for too long. She talked about control, about being used, about how belief had been twisted into a weapon. He used our work, our bodies, our minds, and for a long time it worked. But she refused to let that be the end of it. With her statement on record, everything shifted. Suddenly the case had weight, direction, a way forward. The move came early on a spring morning in May 2002. More than 200 people took part. Local deputies, federal agents, marshals, tactical teams, all of them focused on one man. The risk wasn't just his arrest. It was what might happen if he had time to speak to his followers first. Inside the compound were families, children, people trained to see law enforcement as enemies. If York sensed what was coming, the outcome could turn catastrophic. So they waited. The plan was simple and patient. Track him. Follow him. Don't touch the compound until he left it. Surveillance stayed constant. On the ground. From the air. Hours dragged by. Radios stayed quiet. No one moved faster than they had to. Then the gates opened. A dark car rolled out onto the road. Agents followed at a distance, careful not to break the illusion. The car pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store. Teams were already in place. Their job was confirmation. Nothing more. They waited. Breath held. Eyes fixed. If the wrong person stepped out, the operation would end right there. The back door opened. It was him. Dwight York stepped onto the pavement. That was the moment. Agents moved in from every direction, clean and fast. No shouting. No chaos. Just bodies closing the space until there was nowhere left to go. York was taken into custody without resistance. Sometimes the loudest moments are the quiet ones. With York secured, attention shifted back to the compound. Sheriff Howard Sills led the convoy himself. Dozens of vehicles moved toward Tamari. Not aggressively. Carefully. Everyone understood who was still inside. The gates opened. No shots fired. No standoff. No resistance. After years of secrecy and fear, the place went still. The compound was shut down without violence. In the months that followed, the work didn't stop. With York detained, investigators gathered more testimony. Survivors came forward. Experts reviewed evidence. The picture filled in piece by piece. Nearly 2 years later, in early January of 2004, the trial began. York faced charges tied to child abuse, sexual assault, organized criminal activity, conspiracy, and financial crimes. This time, he wasn't preaching. He wasn't directing. He was sitting quietly at a table, answering to the system he once claimed didn't apply to him. Across the room, survivors sat together. Hands linked. Silent. Present. You could feel that they weren't alone anymore. Among the people sitting together in that courtroom is Nikki. She looks toward York and barely recognizes him. The figure who once filled rooms, who spoke as if he were untouchable, is gone. What's left looks ordinary. Older. His hair is grayed. His frame seems smaller inside the orange prison clothing. Whatever myth once surrounded him doesn't survive the room. Nikki stands anyway. Her hands shake a little, but her posture doesn't fold. She walks toward the witness stand and faces the man who controlled her childhood. The power has shifted, even if the air still feels heavy. It's strange how authority disappears once it's questioned out loud. She speaks. Not perfectly, not theatrically, just honestly. The testimony stretches on for weeks. Stories overlap. Patterns repeat. What once lived in isolation becomes public record. On January 23, 2004, the verdict comes back. Guilty on 11 of 13 counts. The sentence follows soon after. The maximum allowed. Among the state and federal cases, York admits guilt to dozens of offenses involving children, transporting minors across state lines for abuse, conspiracy, and racketeering. He is sentenced to a 135-year federal prison term, spending nearly every day in isolation for most of the day. There are no appeals left. That chapter is closed. Afterward, Nikki leaves Georgia behind. She settles in South Florida, carrying very little with her except the chance to start again. She earns her equivalency diploma. She turns toward art, not as escape, but as expression, as connection. Over time, purpose replaces survival. In 2015, she helps launch an organization called What's Your Elephant? It uses art to challenge silence, to question what people are taught not to talk about. For years now, she's worked inside her community, creating space for others to speak when they're ready. York once called himself a leader. Nikki never does. Some people lead by demanding belief. Others just show what's possible. She's clear about what happened to her. Clear about who he was. He deceived them, exploited their trust, used their bodies, their labor, their faith. And now, she says, he lives within the same confinement he once imposed on others. He doesn't get the final word. Her decision to testify doesn't fade quietly. Later that same year, she receives the Lewis E. Peters Memorial Service Award, the highest civilian humanitarian recognition in the country. Not for surviving, but for stepping forward. Today, Nikki continues the work, supporting people who've been ignored, helping them tell their stories in their own voices. Her life doesn't erase what came before, but it proves something else can grow after it. Story 4. The SUV belongs to a woman named Amy Lord. She is 24 years old, from Massachusetts, living in Boston. Early that morning, the vehicle eases into a bank lot and pauses at an automated teller. From the outside, it could pass as ordinary. Then the window comes down. Amy is sitting there, but she isn't in control of the car. The man driving keeps his head low, angled away from the camera. Amy's face is visible for only a moment, long enough to notice swelling around her left eye. Something has already happened to her. The exchange is quick. Cash comes out. Amy pulls back, turns slightly, shows the bills to the man beside her. The SUV reverses and disappears. A short time later, it stops again. Another bank. Another machine. This time, Amy looks more distressed. She lifts her face toward the ceiling camera, holding the stare just a second longer than before. Then they leave again, just as fast. Between 6 and 7 in the morning, she drains what she can. 5 separate machines across South Boston. No lingering. No conversations caught on camera. Just movement. By 8 o'clock, the SUV is burning in a parking lot. By 11, her manager calls police to report that Amy hasn't shown up for work. Investigators have little to work with. A handful of security clips. A woman who appears to be withdrawing her own money, while clearly under someone else's control. Time feels thin already. Then another call comes in. A young woman is found bleeding badly, collapsed and alone. I remember thinking, this doesn't feel like a separate thing. It felt connected right away. The injured woman is named Kaylee. Someone recognizes her before authorities even confirm her name. The realization hits fast and hard. Her mother tries to reach her. She's told she can't speak with her yet. Kaylee is in surgery, in the emergency room, barely holding on. There's a sense among investigators that Kaylee might matter beyond her own survival. Whatever happened to her could explain what's happening to Amy. It could point to the same person. First, though, she has to make it through the night. I was scared he wouldn't be done, that he'd come back. Even there, 3 months earlier, Kaylee had arrived in Boston from a small town in Maine. It was meant to be temporary, just the summer. Her best friend offered her a room, and her mother helped her settle in. They rode the subway together, practiced routes, learned which line led to Cambridge, where to get off, how to come back at night. It was careful, ordinary, the kind of preparation parents do when they can't be nearby. Her mother worried anyway. Big cities invite risks you can't map out in advance. Still, Kaylee was confident, independent, busy. By midsummer, she was juggling an internship, shifts at a restaurant, and early morning field hockey training. Nothing about her life suggested danger. Boston had been kind to her so far. Then came July 23rd. Just after 4 in the morning, Kaylee is asleep in her apartment on Gate Street. Quiet, unaware. Less than a mile away, another woman is already outside, walking through the dim streets before sunrise. A man notices her. A detective later explains where he was when the call came in. Not on patrol. Sitting in a courthouse, waiting on a verdict from an unrelated homicide case. The interruption was sudden. The report described an assault. Time stamped around 4:24 in the morning. A woman attacked without warning. Her name is Alexandra Cruz. She is 21. A single mother. On her way to work before dawn. She drops her son off with a babysitter. Steps back outside. The street is quiet in that way it gets just before morning starts to feel real. Alexandra walks along Old Colony Avenue, heading toward the coffee shop where she works. The lights are still on inside, but she isn't there yet. Someone is behind her, close enough to hear her steps. At first, it doesn't register. Then hands grab her from the back. An arm slides around her neck. Tight. Crushing. She's pulled off the sidewalk, dragged toward a parking lot she didn't even notice was there. She fights. Tries to twist free. The blows come fast. Her vision fades. When Alexandra wakes up, she's on the ground. The man is still there. Calm now. Bent over her purse, sorting through what she owns as if time doesn't matter at all. That part, the calmness after, that's what stays with you. By the time the woman manages to get back on her feet, the man has vanished. Later, when the report is reviewed, one detail keeps coming up. Alexandra remembers his face clearly enough to mention a mole near his lip. Not a dramatic feature, just specific enough to matter. That detail narrows things. A search through booking records brings back a small list. Around 10 names. One photograph stands out. A man who lives in South Boston. The image gets folded and slipped into a pocket for now. The investigation into Alexandra's attack is still in its earliest stage when another call interrupts the momentum. It comes from a supervisor. A warning, really. There's a missing person case unfolding in the same area. A young woman named Amy Lord. She lives only a few blocks from where Alexandra was attacked. Amy's co-workers were the first to notice something was wrong. She was never late. Not for anything. When she didn't show up, alarms went off immediately. She was always early. That was just who she was. Her sister, Carly, says lateness wasn't in Amy's nature. Amy had plans. Clear ones. She moved forward with confidence, like someone who expected her life to unfold the way she imagined it. Carly and her parents drive from Wilbraham to Boston as soon as they can. They meet detectives at Amy's apartment. Inside, nothing looks disturbed. No broken locks. No overturned furniture. No signs of a struggle. Two things are missing, though. Amy's black Jeep. And her wallet. With no physical clues to work from, attention turns to money. Bank records. Digital footprints. Anything that might show movement. The account history starts early that morning. Just after 6. One withdrawal attempt, then another. 5 different banks, back to back. Too fast. Too scattered. At this point, investigators don't yet know if Amy's disappearance and Alexandra's assault are connected. But the timing sits uncomfortably close. Same neighborhood. Same morning. While waiting for surveillance footage to be released from the banks, the detective explains what little is known to Amy's family. Missing is bad enough. ATM withdrawals at multiple locations make it worse. The possibilities narrow in unsettling ways. The mood shifts as the first videos arrive. The earliest clip shows Amy alone at an ATM, normal posture. No visible distress. Nothing that helps. Then another recording comes in. This one changes things. At around 6:43 in the morning, a black Jeep pulls up. Amy steps out, but from the passenger side. As she walks toward the bank, the Jeep reverses away from the curb. Someone else is driving her car. That detail lands heavily. And then there's her face. The left side appears swollen. Puffy. Not subtle. More footage follows. Each clip is examined slowly, frame by frame. From another bank earlier that morning, Amy is visible again. Her clothes are clear. Her posture. The marks on her face are starting to show more clearly now. Redness around the eyes. Swelling along the nose. Those signs don't come from stress or fatigue. They suggest force. There's no indication she's making choices. No hesitation that feels voluntary. The pattern is consistent. This is not someone running errands. This is an abduction. You can tell when someone's just going through motions. The final pieces of footage offer the closest look yet at the man involved. At a credit union just after 6:14, Amy's Jeep pulls into the lot. Through the glass, the driver is briefly visible. He notices the camera almost immediately. He pulls back, then leans forward again, this time with his face covered. For a moment, his cap lifts. A shaved head flashes into view. Just long enough to register. Not long enough to identify. He never leaves the vehicle. Amy leans in. He leans away. The interaction is controlled, tight, practiced. No clean frontal image ever emerges. Nothing definitive. As the bank footage is analyzed, another video surfaces, this one from across the street from Amy's apartment. The camera angle is poor, grainy. Only part of the doorway is visible. A figure passes in front of it. Male. That's all that can be said with confidence. He slows, turns his head slightly, appears to look toward the glass entrance. Moments later, the door opens. Amy steps halfway out. The man lunges forward, forcing her back inside. The video cuts out soon after. I just kept thinking about how fast that moment must have felt to her. The footage isn't clear enough to identify him, but the sequence is unmistakable. She didn't leave willingly, and whatever began at her doorway followed her across the city, bank to bank, until there was nowhere left to go. Whatever he said to her in that hallway mattered. He likely knew things. Where she lived. Who else lived there? What kind of car she drove. Details that don't sound threatening on their own, but together they box someone in. Enough to make cooperation feel safer than resistance. Looking back at the footage, that's what comes through. Not confusion. Fear. A controlled kind of fear. It still hits hard, even now, watching her move from place to place like that. Before detectives can press further, another update lands. The burned vehicle found earlier that morning in South Boston has been identified. It's Amy's Jeep. The fire had destroyed almost everything. Still, the confirmation shifts the case. This isn't a missing car anymore. It's a message, and not a hopeful one. Once the car was found like that, it felt like we were losing ground. As the afternoon wears on, the direction becomes unavoidable. Investigators are told to head to Hyde Park, a wooded area. A body has been discovered. The drive there feels longer than it should. When the detective arrives, he doesn't need much time. He knows who it is. It's Amy Lord. The search ends there. Another detective is with Amy's family when the news is delivered. Years on the job don't prepare you for that moment. Watching parents and a sister absorb it in real time. There's no version of that gets easier. At the scene, the reality settles in fast. The woman seen alive on cameras just hours earlier is gone. The violence is undeniable, overwhelming. One small detail remains with her. A necklace. Angel wings. That contrast, it's hard to put into words. For the lead investigator, it turns personal in a quiet way. He thinks of his own child. Same age. Same milestones. A life running on a parallel track, suddenly broken. There isn't time to sit with it. Someone has done this. And that person is still out there. The focus snaps back to the work. Connecting dots. Proving that the man who attacked Alexander Cruz is the same one responsible for Amy's death. Stopping him before the pattern repeats. Footage is requested from street cameras between the site of the first assault and Amy's apartment. Blocks of video. Hours of movement. Looking for paths. Loops familiar pacing. One thing starts to stand out. A man circling the same area. Again and again. Closed distances. Tight timing. That's when it becomes clearer. This isn't random chaos. It's concentrated. Now there's no longer uncertainty about what they're dealing with. By nightfall, Amy's murder is everywhere. News alerts. Warnings. Police urging women to stay inside or not walk alone in South Boston. But not everyone hears it in time. Kaylee Ballantyne has been working late in Cambridge. Focused on her shift. Unaware of how tense the city has become. She takes the train to Broadway. From there, it's a short walk. Less than a mile. A route she's done before. Just before midnight, she's almost home. 1 block away. What happens next is pieced together later. She makes it inside the building. Somewhere between the entrance and her apartment door, she's attacked. Her roommate opens the door to chaos. Blood on the floor. Kaylee barely conscious. At that same moment, detectives are standing outside Amy's apartment, processing the hallway. Looking for anything they might have missed. Then the call comes in. Another woman. Stabbed. Gate Street. 500 yards away. We just looked at each other. Nobody said it out loud, but we were thinking it. Not again. Hundreds of miles away, in a quiet part of Maine, Kaylee's mother is asleep when her phone starts ringing. The area code jumps out first. 617. Boston. She doesn't answer right away. She just stares at the screen, already bracing herself. The feeling arrives before the words do. Something is wrong. When she picks up, the voice on the other end introduces himself. A Boston police detective. Then he says it plainly. Her daughter has been stabbed. Everything after that blurs. She asks to speak to Kaylee. She's told she can't. Not yet. Kaylee is in the emergency room. In her mind, the questions pile up faster than they can be answered. Someone tried to kill her daughter. That person hasn't been caught. What if he knows she's still alive? What if he comes back? The fear doesn't stay abstract. It settles in her chest and refuses to move. She gets in the car and starts driving toward Boston. The distance feels unreal. Every mile stretches. Every thought circles the same place. Back in South Boston, the scene is still unfolding. Detective Flynn is walking along Telegraph Street, tracing the path Kaylee's attacker took when he fled. Blood marks the route in places. Cameras line the street, some obvious, some half-hidden. From the footage already reviewed, a rough image has formed. A young man, 20s, tattoos, sleeveless shirt, a hat pulled low. After nearly a full day chasing fragments of movement across screens, it finally feels like they're getting closer. Then the call comes in. The dispatcher doesn't ease into it. They believe the man connected to the stabbing just walked into the same hospital where Kaylee is being treated. The words land wrong. They don't make sense at first. Flynn asks the question anyway, just to hear it out loud. You're saying the suspect is in the same emergency room as the victim. There's no time to debate it. Crime scene or not, priorities shift. Lights. Sirens. The drive is short but loud. They rush into Tufts Medical Center through the ambulance entrance. Down the hall. Right turn. Kaylee is there. She reaches for him immediately, gripping his arm with more strength than anyone expects. She tells him what she's just been told. That he's here. That the man who attacked her walked into the hospital. Her voice rises. Panic takes over. You could feel how alert she was. Like her body never shut off. Earlier that night, Kaylee had described her attacker to an emergency responder. Now that same responder spots a man in the hallway who fits the description. Security is alerted. Doors lock. Movement stops. Down the corridor, a figure comes into view. At the same time, miles away, Detective McLaughlin is still outside, moving from camera to camera. He hasn't let go of the photograph from the earlier assault, the one pulled from booking records. It's still in his pocket. His phone rings. Another detective, calling from the hospital. The man in the picture is there. Suddenly, everything tightens. The suspect has a deep cut on his hand. Fresh. Bad enough that it needs attention. Investigators believe it happened during the attack. Kaylee fought back. Hard. Enough to injure him. Every detail points in the same direction. This is the man who attacked Kaylee. Whether he's also responsible for Amy's murder is still unanswered. But one thing is clear. He's not getting anywhere near Kaylee again. Officers move in carefully. No chaos. No confrontation in the emergency room. Several of them surround him and place him under arrest. He's taken to another room. Questioned. He denies everything. Says he was in a fight on the street. Claims he remembers nothing else. The answers go nowhere. Just refusal after refusal. While that's happening, Kaylee's mother finally arrives in Boston. She's met by police in the hospital lobby and guided through corridors that feel too bright, too long. When she sees her daughter, the tension breaks. They hold each other. Cry. Say very little. Her daughter is alive. Still, the fear hasn't fully lifted. Even after they said it was safe, it didn't feel over. Kaylee begins to understand the extent of what her body has been through. Multiple wounds. A collapsed lung. Injuries close enough to vital areas to make the outcome uncertain. She asks the doctor one question. Am I going to live? The answer isn't immediate comfort. But it's enough. In the days that follow, the weight of it all settles in unevenly. Pain. Relief. Shock. Gratitude. All at once. Her family stays close. Their presence becomes an anchor. The nightmare hasn't ended yet. But for the first time since that night, there is something solid to hold on to. She survived. There's no logic that makes it make sense. No explanation that softens it. You just can't understand how someone chooses to do this to another person's child. While Flynn stays at Tufts, close to Kaylee, McLaughlin goes back to the footage. Hours of it. Angles from different places. Pieces that didn't line up before. One clip changes everything. Just after the time Amy is killed, Edwin appears at a gas station. He's buying fuel. Minutes later, police will find Amy's Jeep burned beyond recognition. At the pump, he runs into someone he knows. They exchange words. Nothing urgent. Nothing secretive. McLaughlin tracks that person down later. There's no hesitation in the identification. It was Edwin Alamany. More cameras fill in the rest of the day. He's moving through the city, spending Amy's money. A new phone. Paperwork signed with a fake name. Slim Shady. Lottery tickets. Beer. Cigarettes. He even takes friends out to eat at a Chinese restaurant. Around the same time Amy's body is being recovered, he's standing outside that place, smoking, laughing, passing time. The contrast is hard to absorb. That's the part that sticks with you, how ordinary he looks doing it. After Kaylee's attack, the pattern doesn't change. Another gas station. Edwin talks about being in a fight, shows off his injured hand like it's a badge, laughs with the cashier, performs. Then he gets into a cab and heads straight to the hospital. By now, McLaughlin has the full arc of Edwin's movements. Surveillance tells the story from morning to night. But it's forensics that closes the loop. DNA is found on his sneakers. It matches Amy Lord. That's the point where uncertainty ends. This is the man responsible. Once that came back, there wasn't anywhere left for it to go. At the hospital, Flynn faces a different task. Telling Kaylee what this really means. She didn't just fight off an attacker. She interrupted someone who had already killed. The realization hits her all at once. Hard, like something breaking loose inside. Over the next 2 years, recovery isn't clean or steady. Healing comes in pieces. Court hearings force her to revisit moments she'd rather leave buried. But the case itself moves quickly. The evidence is overwhelming. The jury doesn't need long. At sentencing, Kaylee stands up to speak. She doesn't read from the page she prepared. She speaks from memory, from instinct. She talks about the summer everything changed, about learning how to walk again, about carrying something she never asked for. Then she holds up a necklace, angel wings. It once belonged to Amy. Now Kaylee wears one too. She says she carries Amy with her, that she always will. In every step forward. It wasn't rehearsed. You could tell she just meant it. Life moves on, unevenly. Kaylee finishes school. Alexandra rebuilds her routine. McLaughlin advances in his career. Flynn steps away from the job. Time creates distance, but it doesn't erase the bond between them. Then one day, Flynn gets a call he doesn't expect. Kaylee is on the line. She tells him she's thinking about writing to the man who did this. The silence on Flynn's end stretches. In his mind, every instinct says no. Stay away. Nothing good comes from reopening that door. He tells her that, and then he stops, realizing that's his fear talking. Not hers. That reaction was mine. Plain and honest. I didn't want anything to do with him. Not a word. Not a thought. Not ever. Kaylee was the first one to say it out loud. She told all of us she wanted to forgive the man who attacked her. The room went quiet. No one understood it at first. The question hung there without being asked. How could you even consider that? And still, somewhere underneath the disbelief, it felt true. Like she had reached a place the rest of us hadn't yet. For a long time, Kaylee's life had been shaped by anger. By what was taken from her. By the presence of someone who no longer had any physical access to her, but still occupied space in her mind. Eventually, she realized something else. Holding on to that hatred kept him close. Letting it go was the only way to loosen his grip. When she said it, I could tell she'd already decided. She wasn't asking permission. She writes the letter while he's in prison. Not to excuse what he did. Not to soften it. She writes that he will carry the consequences of his actions. That she will carry the reminders every day of her life. Both things can be true at once. Then she tells him she has forgiven him. Not for his sake. For her own. She explains that forgiveness is what allows her to move forward with calm. With a sense that she's done everything within her control to heal. That choosing not to hate is what finally gives her room to breathe. It wasn't about him anymore. That was the difference. She says forgiving the man who caused her so much pain also taught her something unexpected. Gratitude. For being alive. For the people who stayed. For the days she still gets. She says she tries to stand for what's right. And hate, she's learned, isn't part of that. Not anymore. Story 5. The first thing people remember is the question. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just dropped into the room like it had been waiting there. Do you know what happened to his wife? The answer comes back fast. Too fast. She was killed. and suddenly the room changes. Because once that question is asked that way, this is no longer a conversation. It's an interrogation. Someone in the room is a suspect now, whether they admit it or not. The name attached to that moment matters. Stephanie Lazarus. For more than 2 decades, a murder sits unresolved, untouched by arrest or conviction. And the reason it stayed that way is uncomfortable. Stephanie was not an outsider. She was a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department. One of them, the woman who died, was Sherry Rasmussen, newly married, close to her family, building a future that looked stable and ordinary and safe. She was married to John Rutten, a man who talked about her with a kind of uncomplicated devotion that people noticed. And then one evening in late February, 1986, everything stops. John says he came home from work as usual. The garage door was open. That caught his attention. Sherry's car wasn't there. It felt off, but not alarming. Sherry managed a nursing unit. Long days happened. Emergencies happened. He walked up the stairs anyway. The front door wasn't fully closed. Inside, the living room didn't look like a living room anymore. Sherry was on the floor. Blood everywhere. John reached for the phone. He told the dispatcher he saw his wife on the ground. Paramedics arrived first. One of them lifted the towel covering her face. The damage was obvious before anyone said a word. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't sudden illness. It wasn't something explainable. This was a killing. I remember thinking how quiet it felt for a place where so many people were standing. Police officers began scanning the scene, and what they saw didn't line up neatly. Stereo equipment lay scattered, as if someone had rushed through the house grabbing at things. It looked like a burglary, at least at first, but then there were details you couldn't ignore. Sherry's wrists had been restrained. There was a deep bite mark on her left arm. Blunt injuries to her head from more than one object. 3 gunshot wounds to her abdomen. Her fingernails had carved marks into the front door, like she'd tried to claw her way out. Nothing about that felt quick or random. While one officer quietly recited these observations to colleagues, another sound drifted in from the next room. Soft, uneven, crying. John Rutten was seated at the dining table. He was sobbing, but the officer watching him couldn't reconcile what he was hearing with what he was seeing. His wife was dead in the next room, and yet the reaction felt contained. It didn't match what I expected, and that stayed with me longer than I thought it would. Questions followed. About the alarm system. John admitted it hadn't been set. He wasn't sure the door had been locked. That morning, Sherry was still asleep when he left. The neighborhood felt safe, familiar, quiet, but the doubts kept stacking. Why this townhouse? Tucked away, not visible from the street, not easy to flee from. Burglars usually chose quick exits, places they could vanish from. This didn't fit, so police did what they often do when nothing fits. They looked at the husband. John agreed to a polygraph. The results suggested deception, but suggestion isn't evidence, and without anything solid tying him to the crime, he walked free. The case went cold. Years passed, then more years. The file stayed where cold cases go, untouched unless someone pulls them back into the light. That someone was Sherry's father. He couldn't let it go, especially because he knew something others didn't. He had spoken to Sherry shortly before she died. That conversation had never stopped echoing in his mind. Sherry had described a woman, someone from John's past, an ex-girlfriend who made her uneasy. The description matched Stephanie Lazarus, an active LAPD detective. That's when the room shifts again, because now it's not just about who did it, but who was protected. For Sherry's family, the loss never softened. She was the kind of person who organized holidays, who showed up early, who believed in people even when they didn't believe in themselves. Her younger sister remembers her as a constant presence. Encouraging, confident, steady. The phone call came from their father. Simple words. Sherry was gone. There was screaming, disbelief, then nothing but noise inside their heads. Sherry had been exceptional long before she was a victim. She entered college at 16, skipping ahead while most kids her age were still figuring out who they were. Her father imagined a future in medicine for her. She chose nursing instead, believing it would let her care for people and still build a family of her own. By her early 20s, she held a master's degree. She was already teaching at a major university. Her life wasn't slowing down. It was opening. And somewhere in all of that, someone else had been watching, holding on to something unresolved. That part wouldn't be understood for a very long time. Listening was one of Sherry's quiet skills. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush people. She held eye contact just long enough to let someone know they mattered. Patients noticed it. Coworkers did too. Wherever she worked, people kept saying the same things. Intelligent, steady, someone you trusted without knowing why. By the time she was nearing her 30s, she was already directing nursing operations at Glendale Adventist. That was when, in the spring of 1984, she crossed paths with John Rutten. The first time her sister heard about him was through a phone call. Sherry sounded light. She said she'd met someone at a party. Nothing dramatic, just enough excitement to be noticed. A few weeks later, John was standing in front of the family, real and tangible. When asked how they met, he talked about seeing Sherry from across the room. The smile, the laugh, the way she carried herself. Hearing him say it, the family felt relief more than suspicion. Sherry looked happy. That was enough. They were affectionate in that unforced way. Comfortable, natural. And because Sherry loved John, her sister did too. That feeling didn't survive the phone call. The call didn't come from John. It came from his father. Sherry had been murdered. Nels Rasmussen remembers asking to speak with his son-in-law. The response was immediate and flat. John didn't feel like talking. That's when you realize grief doesn't always sound the way you expect it to. At the police station, the families finally came face to face. John was there, but distant. He wouldn't speak. He said the police wouldn't allow it. Whether that was true didn't matter as much as how it felt. The silence unsettled them. They couldn't tell if this was shock or fear or something else entirely. What they did know was that John seemed focused inward. Protective. Closed. To Nels it felt wrong. Not loud wrong. Just off. From a police standpoint, the direction was predictable. Start with the spouse. The crime happened in her home. Her husband had left that morning. She hadn't gone anywhere else. You didn't need training to see where suspicion would land. As John was led into an interview room, Nels sat with his thoughts. He was in his early 50s, old enough to trust patterns, old enough to sense when something wasn't lining up. And there was more. Things Sherry had been saying in the months before she died. She'd talked about being followed. Not once. Repeatedly. Different locations. The store. The gym. Places that should have been routine. The same person appearing again and again. She said the eyes stood out. Not threatening exactly, but intense. Like they went straight through you. When someone describes being watched like that, you don't forget the way they say it. There was another layer. After the wedding, John's former girlfriend didn't disappear from Sherry's life. She inserted herself into it. One of Sherry's co-workers witnessed an encounter at the hospital. The woman showed up unannounced, dressed to be noticed. She confronted Sherry directly, saying if she couldn't have John, no one would. While detectives questioned John, another officer spoke with the Rasmussens. What they heard felt unreal. Authorities were leaning toward a botched robbery. Thieves. A break-in gone wrong. The stolen items didn't even make sense. Nels rejected it immediately. It wasn't a robbery. He talked about the stalking, the harassment, the fear his daughter had tried to manage quietly. The officer listened, but without a name, there was nowhere to go. No name meant no direction. Sherry had never given one. It's strange how a missing name can stop everything cold. Nels kept talking anyway. He described an incident that still haunted him. A break-in. John's ex-girlfriend forcing her way into Sherry's townhouse. A physical struggle in the living room. Then she ran. Years later, one of the original detectives admitted something unsettling. Those stories weren't in the official file. They weren't in the murder book. As far as the record showed, they had never existed. At Sherry's memorial, her family stood before a room full of colleagues and friends. Nurses, administrators, people whose lives she'd steadied in quiet ways. They thanked everyone for coming. They talked about her work. And they made one thing clear. Sherry Rasmussen had been exceptional. Not just professionally. As a sister. As a daughter. As someone who should have been heard sooner. John spoke once more about Sherry, standing in front of people who loved her. He said she was the best wife anyone could have asked for. The best sister. The best daughter. Someone who wanted everyone around her to be happy. That was it. After that, he never spoke publicly about her again. In the audience, Nels Rasmussen listened with something heavier than grief settling in his chest. Anger mixed with disbelief. A month had passed since his daughter was killed, and nothing had moved. No shift. No pressure. No suspicion aimed at the man who had shared her home. As far as police were concerned, John wasn't a suspect at all. Instead, detectives leaned harder into the burglary explanation. When the Rasmussens pushed back, when they mentioned Sherry's stalker, John's former girlfriend, they were brushed off. At one point, Nels was told they'd been watching too much television, that they were imagining patterns that weren't there. It's a strange thing to be told your fear comes from fiction. Weeks later, less than a mile from Sherry's townhouse, another break-in occurred. A woman returned home and walked straight into two men inside her house. One bolted. The other turned and aimed a revolver at her before fleeing. She survived. She wasn't hurt. But the details echoed. Same area. Same time frame. A handgun. And Sherry had been killed with a gun. So the question lingered quietly in the background. Were these the same men? Had the police been right all along? Or was this coincidence lining up just well enough to look convincing? A police sketch artist met with the surviving homeowner. She described two young men. Faces were drawn. The city was covered with flyers. Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing came back. Eventually, police recovered the only things taken from Sherry's home. Her purse. Her car. Both wiped clean. No prints. No trail. After that, the case went quiet again. Not for months. For years. Nearly 15 of them. At some point, the family stopped expecting answers. One of Sherry's sisters later admitted she'd reached a place where she assumed it would never be solved. That the not knowing would simply become part of life. Nels didn't get there. By the early 1990s, he was living in Arizona, still carrying the weight of what hadn't been done. He read obsessively, especially about forensic science. About a new tool beginning to reshape investigations. DNA. Around that same time, the detective in charge of Sherry's case retired. The file was handed off. For Nels, it felt like the smallest crack in a locked door. He reached out immediately. He offered to pay for DNA testing himself. The answer was no. That wasn't how the department operated. Sometimes the system doesn't bend, even when someone is begging it to. Before Nels could push further, something else happened. Evidence began to vanish. Items tied to the case simply disappeared. And then came an explanation that made little sense. The murder book had been trimmed. Cut down. Too large, they said, for the cold case storage space. Half of it was gone. For the Rasmussens, the pain shifted shape. It wasn't just loss anymore. It was watching the investigation erode in real time. Phone calls went unanswered. Meetings led nowhere. Promises dissolved. Nels felt a responsibility that didn't end with Sherry's death. He couldn't protect her while she was alive. This was the only way left. So he revisited every detail. Again and again. For the next decade, the cycle repeated. Each time the case landed with a new detective, the family flew from Tucson to Los Angeles. They sat in interview rooms. They told the story from the beginning. And each time, they went home empty-handed. One meeting stood out. They were brought into an interrogation room. Detectives arrived carrying a thin folder. Barely anything inside. They had been met with. But it didn't feel like progress. It felt like a performance. By late autumn of 2001, the department could no longer pretend science had stood still. DNA profiling was no longer experimental or rare. The LAPD formed a cold case unit, finally built around forensic evidence instead of instinct. Sherry Rasmussen's file resurfaced. 15 years old. Thick in places. Hollow in others. It landed on the desk of a detective who already had too much to do. Someone who didn't have the hours, or maybe the patience, to sit with it properly. So instead of letting it sink back into storage, the file was passed sideways to a criminalist. Jennifer Francis. She didn't start with theories. She started with boxes. Evidence logs. Notes written by people long retired. She read slowly, not because she was cautious, but because the case felt uneven, like it had been handled by different hands with different levels of care. Eventually, one entry stopped her. A bite mark. Not a small detail. A violent one. Sherry had bitten her attacker, or had been bitten during the struggle. The notation described it as a powerful bite, the kind that locks in. An alligator clutch. But the documentation didn't make sense. Only one blood type had been recorded. That shouldn't happen. Bite marks almost always produce two profiles, victim and attacker. Yet the report leaned toward a strange explanation, that Sherry had bitten herself. Francis stared at that line longer than she should have. That's the kind of thing you reread, just to make sure you didn't misunderstand it. She knew mistakes had been made early on. Missed prints. Sloppy collection. But this felt different. Someone somewhere should have swabbed that wound. With her supervisor's quiet support, Frances went looking. She dug through stacks of old paperwork, logs that hadn't been touched in years. And eventually, buried in a property record from 1986, she found it. A swab. Logged. Listed. Never processed. When she checked the evidence room, it wasn't there. Not booked. Not shelved. Gone. That alone could have ended things. Many people would have stopped there, called it another failure swallowed by time. Frances didn't. She started calling coroners. One by one. Every number she could find. Most had no idea what she was talking about. Then one did. After hours spent searching through cold storage at the county morgue, a coroner came back with something unexpected. A torn envelope. Label nearly gone. Inside it, a glass tube. The swab was still intact. Against every reasonable expectation, Frances tested it immediately. The result didn't match Sherry, and it didn't match any known male suspect either. It was female. That single fact shifted the entire case. As Frances read deeper, another thread emerged. Letters. Notes. References to a grieving father who refused to stop calling. Nels Rasmussen. Over and over, he had warned police about one person. John's ex-girlfriend. Sherry Stocker. A pattern started forming in Frances's mind. Not neat. Not comfortable. But persistent. What if the stalker and the ex were the same person? What if she was the one who had bitten Sherry? And what if she was also the one who killed her? When Frances brought this possibility to a detective, the reaction was immediate dismissal. And then came a detail Frances hadn't known before. John's ex-girlfriend wasn't just anyone. She was a detective with the LAPD. That's the moment when a case stops being theoretical. Inside the department, people bristled. Some scoffed. Others accused Frances of feeding into conspiracy thinking. Cops protecting cops. Tunnel vision. Overreach. They told her she was imagining things. Maybe it was just sloppy work, they said. Maybe nothing more. But Frances kept pushing. She took the evidence to the cold case unit. Then to scientific review. Then to robbery homicide. Then even to internal affairs. And everywhere she went, the focus shifted. Not to the swab. Not to the DNA. To her. Her tone. Her persistence. Her mental state. Supervisors began calling her emotional. Paranoid. Too invested. Eventually, she was ordered into mandatory counseling with a department-approved therapist. Inside the LAPD, that label stuck quickly. Unstable. The sessions weren't about her health. They circled around one thing, what she knew, and who she had spoken to. Frances understood then that this wasn't concern. It felt like punishment. Once that happens, you start measuring every word you say. A deputy district attorney called her irrational. Colleagues stopped trusting her with major cases. Around the lab, people joked. Told her to get a hobby. To let it go. What Frances didn't realize was that she was following a path someone else had walked long before her. Nels Rasmussen. Dismissed. Minimized. Treated as a problem rather than a source. Then, in late autumn of 2009, something finally cracked open. Frances received a call from robbery homicide. A detective named James Nuttall wanted to talk about her findings. She had waited more than 5 years for that phone call. And still, fear held her back. Trust didn't come easily anymore. She told him only part of it. That she didn't believe it was a burglary. That evidence might have been altered. She didn't share her full theory. She didn't need to. Nuttall already had the lab results in front of him. He saw what she saw. The only DNA that wasn't Sherry's belonged to another woman. And he had also read the letters. Dozens of them. From a father who never stopped asking police to look at John Rutten's ex-girlfriend. This time someone was listening. From there, things changed quietly. Not officially. Not on paper. Detective James Nuttall keeps it small. He brings Jennifer Frances in. Adds 3 other detectives he trusts. No announcements. No memos. Just a closed circle inside homicide, working around the edges of a department that has already shown what it does to people who push too hard. The goal is simple, even if the implication isn't. To prove that someone from within their own ranks entered Sherry Rasmussen's home and killed her in 1986. When that idea is first spoken out loud, the reaction is disbelief. Laughter even. A police officer? Impossible. Unthinkable. Nuttall doesn't argue. He just goes back to the files. The first thing they revisit is John Rutten's original interview, recorded the night his wife was found dead. It doesn't age well. The lead detective at the time moves fast. Too fast. He reassures John almost immediately, suggests answers before questions are finished, waves away the idea of relationship problems, declares burglary with confidence that doesn't seem earned. John is never pressed. Not about past relationships. Not about conflict. Not about anyone who might have resented the marriage. Listening now, decades later, Nuttall hears something missing. Resistance. Curiosity. Follow-up. It sounds like someone already decided where it was going. What unsettles Nuttall more is what doesn't exist. In more than 20 years, multiple detectives reopened the case. None of them brought John back in. No second interview. No attempt to revisit the claims Nels Rasmussen had made again and again. So Nuttall does it himself. John is living in Northern California now. He's remarried. He has children. His life has moved on. The case hasn't. From the start, Nuttall takes a different approach. He doesn't circle the burglary theory. He doesn't ease into it. He goes straight to the things that were never documented. The ex-girlfriend. The confrontation at the hospital. The break-in. The stalking. John doesn't hesitate. He names her. He explains that while he and Sherry were engaged, he had continued seeing Stephanie Lazarus. That he knew she was fixated on him. That during their earlier relationship, she crossed lines that felt unsettling even then. Showing up uninvited. Taking personal items. Watching him sleep. None of this was in the original file. By now, Lazarus is no longer just an officer. She's a senior detective. Armed. Her office sits down the same hallway as Nuttall's. To avoid interference, the team works quietly. They follow her. Watch what she discards. Collect what she leaves behind. A used drink cup is enough. Jennifer Francis runs the test. The DNA matches the bite mark. At that point, the case stops being hypothetical. To make the arrest safely, they bring Lazarus into the one place inside the building where no firearms are allowed. The reason given is routine. They say they need her help with a difficult interview. She realizes quickly what's happening. Her voice shifts. Defensive. Sharp. She pushes back. Questions the premise. Points out what it means if she's being treated like a suspect. Then the rights are read. She understands them. And she chooses not to speak. Shock looks different when the person isn't used to being questioned. When the arrest happens, the Rasmussens are notified at home. Tears come fast. Not just relief. Validation. Something finally moving after decades of silence. Nels reacts the way he always has. With intensity. With frustration. With questions aimed at a system that had ignored him for most of his life. Where were you? Why didn't you listen? For him, this wasn't just about a suspect. It was about years spent being dismissed. Told he'd watched too much television. Told he was imagining things. John Rutten later acknowledges the weight of it. That Sherry died because she met him. Married him. That realization doesn't fade with time. The investigation itself takes 4 months. The trial lasts 3 weeks. The jury doesn't take long. Less than a day to decide. After more than 2 decades, the verdict is read. Stephanie Eileen Lazarus is found guilty of murdering Sherry Rasmussen. Relief comes in waves. Not celebration. Just release. For Nels. For the family. For the long stretch of unanswered questions finally ending. Years later, in the early 2020s, Lazarus admits what she did. The confession comes with the possibility of parole. Too late to reach the man who never stopped fighting. Before his death, Nels recorded a statement. His words preserved for future hearings. The parole board hears it. They will hear it again whenever release is considered. He talks about the violence, about the damage, about what it meant, and then the story shifts back where it belongs. To Sherry. Her influence doesn't end with a verdict. It moves forward through the people who remember her. Stories passed down. Choices inspired. Careers shaped. A niece chooses nursing because of her. A wedding dress is worn again, decades later. Small acts. Quiet continuations. Ways of carrying someone forward, long after justice finally arrives. Story 6. The call that morning didn't sound dramatic at first. A request for a welfare check. A quiet house in Broomfield where Crystal Krug lived with her husband, Dan, and their 3 children. December 14th, 2023. Early. Still morning light hours. Police had already heard her name before. About a month earlier, Crystal had walked into the police department herself. No emergency. No visible injuries. Just a controlled urgency in the way she spoke. She said an ex-boyfriend wouldn't leave her alone. Messages. Emails. Showing up. Following. The kind of pressure that doesn't announce itself loudly but keeps tapping, and tapping, and tapping. She admitted it was getting to her. That it was changing how she moved through the world. It didn't sound chaotic. It sounded like someone trying to stay organized while things felt unstable. Officers took it seriously. Patrol units kept an eye on her movements. Dan installed cameras around the house. But the person she described stayed just out of reach. No clear location. No arrest. And the messages didn't stop. Then the tone shifted. What began as something focused on her widened. Now the threats included her husband. The feeling changed. Less background noise. More direct. That morning, just before 9, Crystal sent Dan a message. Ordinary words. The kind you send without thinking twice. He never answered. Dan tried calling. Texting. Nothing came back. And with everything that had already been happening, silence didn't feel neutral anymore. He called police himself. He told them his wife wasn't responding. He reminded them about the stalking. Asked if someone could just check on the house. An officer arrived and walked the property. Everything looked still. Too still. The garage door had small windows near the top, just high enough to block a clear view from the ground. The officer repositioned his vehicle, climbed up, and looked inside. That's when the call went out for medical. Crystal was on the garage floor. Unconscious. Blood visible. A head injury that didn't immediately explain itself. It wasn't clear if she had fallen, or if something else had happened. CPR began. Paramedics were called in. The garage door opened. Outside, her mother arrived. Confusion first. Then concern. Then the sound of activity that doesn't usually mean good news. Police cleared the rest of the house. Voices echoed. Doors checked. Rooms called out. Nothing else out of place. Nothing obvious. At first, someone said it looked like a fall. Then another voice corrected that. Not a fall. Crystal had been struck before she was stabbed. The location suggested it happened as she was getting in or out of her car. Close. Fast. Intentional. A stretcher came in. When the stretcher comes back out empty, people notice. Even before anyone explains it. Not long after, a scream carried up the road. Dan had arrived. He tried to move forward. Officers stopped him. He insisted it was his house. He was right, and it didn't change anything. Someone told him what happened. His body reacted before his mind caught up. His legs gave out. Family caught him. He folded into them, shaking, unable to stand on his own. In a matter of minutes, everything he recognized as normal was gone, and the person responsible hadn't been found. Because of that, Dan wasn't sent home. Not yet. He was brought in for questioning. Not as a suspect, but as someone still at risk. Detective Martinez met him there and immediately saw it wouldn't be possible to ask much. Dan couldn't focus, couldn't sit still. His words came apart when he tried to speak. The detective offered help. People trained to talk to children. People who could explain things gently. Dan refused. He wanted to tell them himself. He sat with his kids and said the words out loud. That their mother had been killed. That she wasn't coming back. No one rushed that moment. For investigators, the priority shifted. Whoever had done this knew where Crystal lived, knew her routine, and might come back. Family members were separated and interviewed. Everyone was asked the same questions. Names, messages, anything unusual. But the most detailed account had already been given. By Crystal. 1 month before her death, she had called the police department and reported threatening contact from an ex-partner. Emails, calls, a pattern that was tightening instead of fading. Detective Martinez had taken that case. When he met her in person, she stood out. Not because she was loud, but because she was composed. Alert. Prepared. She didn't ramble. She didn't guess. She brought documentation. You don't expect a spreadsheet, but when it's there, you realize how long someone's been tracking this on their own. Crystal explained how the messages had escalated, how she felt watched, how she was trying to keep everything straight, because no one else could see it the way she could. She wanted one thing, for it to stop. She laid everything out. Dates written in words. Screenshots. Notes. Organized evidence of a life being narrowed, day by day. At the time, it was a report. Later, it became a map. She explained it later in a very matter-of-fact way. Almost casual. That all she really did was decide to start writing things down. Nothing dramatic. Just a record. Something she could control. A stalker log. She didn't know if she'd ever need it. She just didn't want to rely on memory anymore. Dates. Times. Where it happened. How it made her feel. If she felt uneasy, she wrote that too. Some people document things instinctively. Not because they're scared yet, but because they sense they might need proof someday. The first entry in that log goes back to late September, 2023. That's where everything begins. That afternoon, Dan came home earlier than usual. Somewhere just before 5. As he pulled in, he noticed the garage door wasn't right. Not fully closed. Just off enough to catch his attention. Then he saw someone moving. A figure running out of the house. Over the gate. Gone before Dan could process what he was looking at. He caught flashes. Jeans. A gray shirt. The size of the person more than the face. He didn't chase. His focus went straight to the kids. Police arrived and listened as Dan tried to describe what he'd seen. The timeline. The direction the person ran. Officers walked the area, checked nearby streets, but no one matching the description turned up. Inside the garage, something small stood out. The spare key. It was gone. Not the toolbox. Not anything else. Just the house key they kept there in case of emergencies. When Crystal found out, fear wasn't her first reaction. Irritation was. She focused on the garage door. Whether it had been left open. Whether this was careless instead of dangerous. She didn't jump to the worst conclusion. At least not yet. Dan changed the locks. That seemed to settle it. For a moment, life moved forward again. Then, a few days later, a message arrived. An unfamiliar number. A name she recognized. Anthony. The text was casual. Too casual. He said he'd looked her up. Mentioned visiting Boulder now and then. Suggested they meet up. Asked if she was interested. The problem was, the only Anthony she knew with that name was someone from her past. Someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Her log shifts at that point. The tone tightens. She starts outlining who Anthony was. How far back they went. They dated briefly after high school, more than 2 decades earlier. Summer months. Nothing intense. Nothing dramatic. He was likable. People generally liked him. But their lives were headed in different directions. She was moving toward college, toward engineering. He wasn't. She ended it cleanly. No screaming. No betrayal. Just an ending. About a year later, she met Dan. That relationship felt different almost immediately. Serious. Grounded. Real in a way she hadn't questioned. As the years went on, Anthony would reappear from time to time. Messages through social media. Attempts to reconnect. Each time, she said no. She told him when she had a serious boyfriend. When she moved in with Dan. When she got married. When she had children. And every time, he pushed back emotionally. Not violent. Not threatening. Just intense. Hurt. Insistent that they were supposed to be together. Eventually, he blocked her. She didn't fight it. She later shut down her social media accounts entirely. Long before the pandemic. Old emails abandoned. Old accounts gone. As far as she knew, there was no easy way to reach her anymore. And then suddenly there was. When the October message came in, she didn't respond. The next day, another text arrived. This one wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't hopeful. It was cruel. Insults. Sexual language. Mockery about her appearance. About her marriage. It didn't sound like the person she remembered. That kind of shift, it's unsettling. When someone familiar suddenly feels like a stranger. She read it more than once, trying to reconcile it with who Anthony used to be. The tone felt unstable. Personal. Mean in a way that felt deliberate. She chose not to answer. Part of her hoped silence would end it. That if this really was Anthony, he'd understand the boundary and disappear again. She logged the messages. And waited. At the time, she still thought there might be an edge to it. An ending. She didn't realize this was only the beginning. Another message arrived. Different tone. Different number. A stranger asking if she was still looking for men. She remembers pausing, rereading it, feeling something shift. This didn't sound like Anthony anymore. Then more came in. One after another. Different unknown numbers. Always men. Many of them sending explicit photos of themselves, unsolicited, graphic, relentless. It stopped feeling random. She started searching online, trying to understand why this was happening at all. That's when she found it. A classified post. Her name. Her phone number. An ad inviting men to send explicit images directly to her. She knew instantly it was meant to humiliate her. To overwhelm her. To invade her space in a way she couldn't turn off. What she didn't know was who had posted it. Anthony felt like the obvious answer, but she didn't have proof. And that uncertainty began to seep into everything, including her marriage. The constant interruptions. The stress. The suspicion. She and Dan weren't syncing the way they used to. Conversations turned into arguments more easily. Silence lingered longer than it should have. You can feel it when something external starts pulling two people slightly out of alignment. By the end of October, nearly a month after the first messages, something arrived that removed any doubt about how serious this had become. An email. Attached was a photograph of Dan, taken at his workplace. Candid. Close enough to feel intentional. The sender's address pointed straight back to a name she hadn't wanted to believe anymore. And the message wasn't vague. It made it clear this wasn't just about her now. This had crossed over. She told police that whatever this was, it had escalated. That the threats weren't limited to her anymore. They were aimed at her husband. Dan had cameras in his car. Dash footage that might have helped. But he hadn't noticed anyone at the time. And by the time they realized the significance, the video was gone. No proof. Just the awareness that someone had been close enough to take that photo. From that point on, fear settled in differently. Not panic. Something heavier. Something quieter. She understood now that someone was watching their routine. Learning it. What troubled her the most was still Anthony himself. Or the version of him this person claimed to be. She kept going back over their history, trying to find signs she'd missed. There hadn't been violence. Ever. Arguments, sure. Emotional moments. But nothing that hinted at this. When her parents came to visit that weekend, she didn't soften the truth. She told them she was being stalked. That she was receiving threatening messages. That things were getting strange, and then stranger. She asked for help navigating a restraining order. What it would take. What steps mattered. She had already hired a private investigator. The goal was simple. Find Anthony. Serve him papers. Create a boundary with legal weight. But he was difficult to locate. Moving often. No stable address. Crossing between multiple states. Without a confirmed location, the order couldn't move forward. So they adapted. Dan installed security cameras around the house. They both added dash cameras to their vehicles, just in case. Still, what worried her most were the kids. That's when she made another decision. She purchased a handgun. That choice didn't come from confidence. It came from fear. She planned to train with it, to relearn, to be careful. She bought a concealed carry purse designed specifically for that firearm. But when she went to the range with a family member, she couldn't even get out of the car. She stayed in the parking lot and cried. Overwhelmed. Shaken. Hugged until the moment passed. Inside the house, her children were starting to notice. The tension. The whispers. The way conversations stopped when they entered the room. She decided not to hide it anymore. She explained carefully that someone was bothering her. That they needed to know what to do if something felt wrong. How to get help. How to speak up. Her oldest admitted later that knowing was better than guessing. That the silence had been scarier than the truth. So Crystal tried to keep things steady. School. Routines. Normal meals. Normal nights. From the outside, life kept its shape. Inside she stayed alert. She tried to keep one part of life untouched. Her oldest daughter had dance. Rehearsals. Costumes. The rhythm of counting steps and waiting in the wings. Crystal made sure that space stayed clean of fear. She showed up early. Helped backstage. Fixed hair. Lined kids up so no one missed their cue. That was her anchor. With the holidays approaching, her daughter was preparing for 2 performances of the Nutcracker. Something she'd been excited about all year. But by then, word of the situation had spread quietly through the dance company. No one knew where the stalker was. No one knew how close he might be. The artistic director made a decision. Crystal was asked to stop volunteering. To stay away from the performances entirely. It wasn't framed as punishment. It was safety. But it crushed her. That kind of loss isn't public, but it hits hard. She told investigators she believed much of this was about fear. About intimidation. That maybe the goal wasn't contact, yet. But she worried about the moment that changed. The moment silence stopped being enough and turned into something else. Detective Martinez believed her. When she left that meeting, he was convinced the threats were real, credible. Time mattered. His first priority was confirmation. He needed to know with certainty who was behind the messages. Warrants went out to phone carriers and tech companies, Verizon, messaging services, email providers. Those responses don't come quickly. Some take weeks, others longer, and he was careful not to move too soon. Approaching the wrong person, or the right person too early, could make things worse. Sometimes even acknowledging someone like this is enough to encourage them, to make them feel untouchable. 2 days later, another message arrived. This one erased any remaining distance. It referenced her dentist appointment, claimed sexual acts, claimed proximity, suggested the sender had been nearby, watching from a car. The implication mattered more than the words. Crystal contacted Detective Martinez immediately. An officer was sent to her home. The concern was specific now. A tracker. Her car was lifted, inspected inch by inch, top to bottom, front to back. Nothing was found, but the fear didn't leave with the inspection. The in-person references were what terrified her most. The idea that someone could be close without being seen, that the messages lined up too cleanly with her movements. Undercover officers were assigned to watch the area, to sit nearby, to notice patterns, unfamiliar vehicles. They didn't find anything. Not finding something doesn't always bring relief. Sometimes it does the opposite. By then, the pressure had worked its way into her marriage. She and Dan argued constantly. About safety, about decisions, about things that had nothing to do with the stalking at all. She told her parents she thought they might divorce. Then the messages escalated again. This time, there was no ambiguity. The sender wrote about removing Dan, about them being together once he was gone, about how easy it would be if she just gave a signal. It was a direct threat. Dan came in to speak with Detective Martinez himself. He didn't try to hide how bad it had become. He admitted he was paranoid, that his panic spiked over small sounds, dropped objects, sudden movements in public. He felt like he was failing her. The detective noticed something unsettling during that conversation. Crystal seemed more prepared, more alert, more grounded in survival mode. Dan was unraveling. The fear was consuming both of them, but differently. Crystal told people close to her that she didn't think this would stop, that eventually someone would be killed, that the trajectory felt unavoidable. What terrified her most wasn't herself. It was her children. She wasn't dramatic about it. She was tired. By December, exhaustion had settled in. Real exhaustion. The kind that comes from not sleeping, from staying alert too long. Her parents spoke with her almost every day, tracking where she was, how she sounded, whether she felt safe. They had never seen her like this. On December 13th, the day before she died, the dash camera in her car recorded something small. Not evidence, not a confrontation, just a glimpse of her moving through a life that had become unbearably narrow. The dash camera doesn't show anyone following her. What it captures instead is quieter than that. Her face, her posture, the way exhaustion has settled into her. 3 months of pressure written into small movements. Long pauses at stoplights. A woman trying to stay functional while carrying too much. Thursday morning, December 14th. The security cameras around the house begin recording the day in pieces. Just before 7, Dan drives their oldest to the bus stop. He's back home minutes later. Nothing unusual. At a little before 8, Crystal leaves again, taking the younger two to school. She returns shortly after. At 24 minutes past 8, Dan pulls out of the driveway, heading toward his office about half an hour away. While he's on the road, at 8:56 his phone vibrates. A text from Crystal. She asks if he can pick up their daughter after school. She mentions a meeting with Detective Martinez. He doesn't see it right away. When he arrives at work about 20 minutes later, he replies. Agrees to pick her up. Adds a small, ordinary note about lunch he forgot on the counter. There's no response. At first, it doesn't seem alarming. Then minutes pass. Then more. Dan starts calling. No answer. He keeps trying. By midday, worry has fully replaced patience. At 1 minute past noon, he calls police and asks for a welfare check. He also calls Crystal's mother, Linda, who lives nearby. Linda assumes it's nothing serious. A missed call. A phone left somewhere. She drives over anyway. When she reaches the driveway, she sees activity. An officer. A tense tone. Words that don't make sense yet. Someone says there's a woman with a head wound. She's warm. As the garage door opens, Linda steps forward instinctively. She tries to look inside. An officer stops her, tells her to stay back, asks her to move aside so they can work. She protests, says her daughter is okay, that she just needs to see her. Then reality lands all at once. There are moments when certainty disappears instantly, replaced by something final. Linda screams. She knows. Before anyone confirms it, she knows. When Dan arrives, he doesn't speak at first. He collapses into Crystal's family, sobbing. His body shakes. He's held upright by people who are barely standing themselves. Crystal is dead, and whoever did this hasn't been found. Detectives split their focus. One group stays at the house, processing the scene. Others begin canvassing nearby streets, knocking on doors, asking questions. Another team turns toward the suspect they've been tracking for weeks, Jack Anthony Holland. He's been difficult to locate, but they have something now. A license plate tied to his name. A nationwide alert goes out. It hits almost immediately. Not in Colorado. Utah. North Central. Authorities there are contacted. A joint decision is made. Deputies move toward an address connected to the vehicle. They find it parked outside a residence. They have a warrant for stalking. Anthony answers the door. He's calm, cooperative, identifies himself by name, invites them inside, seems confused about why they're there. He's already home, only hours after the murder. The deputies begin asking questions. Carefully, slowly. They ask if he's ever heard the name Crystal Krug. He recognizes it, remembers her as his first girlfriend, talks about how smart she was, how the breakup hurt. He describes his morning, says he went shopping, produces a receipt from a store near Salt Lake City, time stamped, location verified. He admits he contacted her years ago, says the last message was in 2016. An apology, a drunk message. After that, nothing. No recent contact, no messages, no explanation for the harassment. Colorado detectives are left with nothing they can use. No legal grounds to hold him. No evidence tying him to the murder. He's released. That's when the ground shifts under an investigation. With a homicide now confirmed, everything accelerates. The search warrants Detective Martinez requested weeks earlier are no longer treated as routine. Responses start coming back. Fast. Data from phone carriers, messaging services, email providers. And what the information shows doesn't match the story investigators had been following. The digital trail doesn't lead across state lines. It leads to one place. Dan's office. The emails. The phone numbers. The Wi-Fi connections. All originating from the same network. The burner phone used to send the first messages was traced to a store in Broomfield. Purchased with a gift card. A gift card registered to Dan. The photo sent to Crystal, the one of Dan outside his workplace, is analyzed more closely. Metadata reveals it was taken in selfie mode, with a timer. And the text Crystal sent Dan that morning, the one asking him to pick up their daughter, it wasn't typed then. It was scheduled. Sent after Dan had already left the house. Everything converges at once. Police move quickly. Dan is pulled over while driving to his daughter's dance performance. The Nutcracker, the same show Crystal had been asked not to attend. He's taken into custody, charged with the murder of his wife. That's when the story everyone thought they understood breaks apart completely. Investigators would later realize how deliberate it all was. Dan wasn't reacting in real time. He was constructing a version of events, a timeline that could stand on its own. He wanted proof that Crystal had been alive after he left the house. That's why the text mattered. The one that appeared on his phone while he was already at work. The one he pointed to later and said, "See, she was still alive." What the data showed was different. The message hadn't come from her in that moment. It had been scheduled, sent automatically, a text he had arranged to receive. At work, he didn't move randomly. He walked specific paths, past specific cameras, made sure he was seen, visible, traceable. Then he tried to message her back. Again, and again. Not to help, to avoid being the one who found her. That's why he didn't rush home. Why he called in a welfare check instead of going himself. Why he kept distance between himself and the garage. When you look at it that way, it doesn't feel like panic. It feels like planning. Later, during questioning, his frustration surfaced. A quiet resentment. Why him? Why this? Why did it have to be him in the middle of it all? But for some people close to Crystal, the arrest didn't land as a shock. Just hours after her death, her mother Linda told detectives something that stuck with them. She said Anthony might not be the only person worth looking at. Crystal had told her the marriage was over. Not strained. Over. That in recent months, she couldn't stand Dan anymore. That staying felt wrong, but leaving felt complicated. Another family member remembered hugging Linda that day, the question slipping out before it could be stopped. Did he kill her? Linda didn't have an answer. Just a feeling she couldn't ignore. Then came a statement from Crystal's stepmother. She said Crystal had told her something days before the murder. That she couldn't rule Dan out anymore. That even saying it out loud felt strange, but necessary. It wasn't an accusation. More like a realization she hadn't finished processing yet. Investigators began to consider a possibility that reframed everything. That Crystal was getting close to the truth. That she might have realized the stalker wasn't an ex-boyfriend from her past, but the man she was living with. And that once Dan understood she was closing in on that truth, he acted. In early April of 2025, Dan Krug stood in court and entered a plea. Not guilty. To first-degree murder. To stalking. At the first hearing, he looked around the room. Made eye contact. Smiled. Some thought he believed people were there to support him. One person noticed the moment his expression changed. When he realized that wasn't the case. After that, he didn't look their way again. Despite the overwhelming digital evidence, the case wasn't airtight on the surface. Physical evidence was limited, and the stakes were high. If Dan walked free, he would gain full custody of the children. That possibility terrified Crystal's family. Then another voice entered the case. One of Dan's former partners. She agreed to testify only if her identity was protected. Even years later, she was afraid of him. She described a familiar pattern. After their breakup, she began receiving disturbing calls and messages from unknown sources. At the time, police traced them back to a college Dan attended on the East Coast. She had obtained a temporary restraining order. No charges were filed then. Now the pattern mattered. It was the first time his behavior didn't look isolated anymore. After 7 days of testimony, the jury was sent out to deliberate. Crystal's parents waited, silent, bracing. When the jury returned, the decision was unanimous. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Guilty of stalking. Guilty of criminal impersonation. Dan Krug was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called it appropriate. Necessary. Dan had believed he could control the narrative. That the layers he built would hold. What he didn't account for was Crystal. Her documentation. Her logs. Her insistence on writing everything down. On leaving a trail, even when she didn't know why she needed it yet. She solved her own case, without ever knowing she would. Crystal's children no longer live in the house where all of this unfolded. They live with her parents now. Protected. Surrounded by people who loved her. She wanted them safe. That was always the point. And even in the end, she made sure they were. Now, the children are wrapped in the kind of care Crystal would have insisted on herself. Her family makes sure of that. They're surrounded by familiar voices, routines, patience. Nothing extravagant. Just steady love. The kind that shows up every day. Everything she would have done for them is still being done. It hasn't been long. Only 2 years since she was killed. For her parents, time hasn't softened much. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. Some days feel manageable. Others arrive heavy, without warning. There isn't really a better day. There are just days you get through. Mornings are often the hardest. Waking up brings the loss back fresh, before there's anything to distract from it. The absence is still there. Sharp. Familiar. But then there are the children. Her parents say that when they look at their grandchildren, something shifts. A small moment of calm. A reflection. A gesture, a laugh, a look that feels unmistakably hers. You see her in them, and for a second the pain eases. That's how her memory stays alive. Not in anniversaries or photographs alone, but in ordinary moments. In the way her children are raised. In the care surrounding them now. Every day is still hard. But every day she's still there. That's the stories tonight. Thank you for spending part of your evening here with me. I truly appreciate you choosing Sleepcrime as part of your nighttime routine. As you leave these stories behind, I hope you can also leave behind the weight they may carry. Let your mind become a little quieter, your breathing a little slower, and allow the rest of the night to belong to peace instead of these events. Take good care of yourself, sleep well, and I'll be here again soon with more true stories for another quiet night. Good night.